3 years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit. The bottom of all our windows were level with the ground outside. It was an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa and immediately runs to the window near me and looks out frantically. He then looks out every other window in the apartment, then walks around outside looking in the windows. When he comes back in, I ask him what the hell was going on and why he was being a spaz. I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, which was 2 p.m., and the number of people out and about around the complex at the time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or something passing by that happened to glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, and when I would answer it, no one would be there. I'd find things in the apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. The window was open. It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing, and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might be a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right next to the other side of the window, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking that a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He did not blink or move. He just looked right at me, a way that I've never been looked at before, or since. In an instant, I realized that because this window was level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment, or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face into my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was just messing with him. When I buried my face into his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone out the window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time that he did, the man was gone. It was at this point that I started to think about the little odd occurrences that I had been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded up my apartment with weapons to protect myself, or at least to inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, my boyfriend and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple of times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night that I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work an hour earlier, and we had sat on the sofa together for a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear the door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean over a little bit to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of the bedroom. So as you can imagine the shock when I lean over and see that the door that's opening is a door to the water heater closet, small storage space. I look to the right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back at the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. I ran my ass barefoot out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work, where I called the cops. Of course, when everyone got to the apartment, he was gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit and went to stay with my parents. 6 months later, we moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. I initially found the sub around the same time I was trying to find other stories that were similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story eventually, and I figured after this week's events I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all this happened, so part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I hear a knock on my front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver and didn't answer. I'd go get my package later. Then they knocked again and again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited there a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out for groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings just to chill or check on my plants, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. Never thought it was a huge deal until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. This particular deadbolt can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assume someone robbed me because I dumbly left the patio door unlocked. I called my sister, and I called my current boyfriend, which isn't the same boyfriend from earlier. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into the apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place, nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched, nothing was stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he did not take this shit lightly, like my past boyfriend did. I filed a police report, and we looked for recording devices and cameras. He put a nest of cameras up all over the place, and we were on high alert. I truly hope that this was a coincidence, but if this man followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. So this has been happening for 1.5 years now, and tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize that I wasn't imagining things. About 1.5 years ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I suddenly started noticing that things would be out of place when I got home from work. Things that almost seemed out of place on purpose to mess with my OCD. Sometimes I would notice knives that were put back into the knife block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around the house being turned to face the wrong way. Sometimes my clothes were hung up in my closet the wrong way. Little things like that, where I'd feel something was off, but there was no way to prove it, and in all honesty, could have just been me being absent-minded when putting things away. After a couple of months of things randomly being out of place, and always having that creeped out feeling, things suddenly stopped being out of place, and I put it to the back of my mind, and stopped being so paranoid. Moved on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. My cat has seriously been trying to tell me something when I had gotten home from work. Any of you who have a cat will know that exact meow. It's not the I'm hungry, or I'm pissed because you have been at work all day meow, but more like a oh my god, you will never believe what happened meow, if that makes sense. I didn't really think anything of it, because cats can be jerks sometimes, and I just assumed he was bored and wanted to complain. The other day when I came home from work, I noticed a pair of balled up socks that did not belong to me sitting on my bedroom floor. My boyfriend came over the next night, and I told him he had left a pair of socks here when he had stayed over on the weekend. He looked at the socks and said that they were not his. My heart sunk, and so did his. We both knew at that moment that someone had been coming into my house again, and that I probably wasn't imagining it the first time. A few days later, I came home from work and found a bag from a lingerie store on the top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had came from inside my house, as I had just bought a bathing suit from that store a couple weeks prior, and the receipt was still in the bag. At first, I thought my cat might have dragged it there, but upon inspecting the bag, there were no teeth marks, as well as the cat couldn't have opened the closet door and gone into the paper cardboard recycling that I keep in there on the top shelf. The final, and perhaps the most unsettling thing happened tonight. My boyfriend met me after work and we went out for dinner. We went back to my apartment after, and when I went to unlock the door, I noticed that it was already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave my house is one of the things that I'm most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it. It is not just a habit I have, but something that is deeply ingrained into me. Everyone who knows me knows this about me, as I even do it to their doors. I have to check it 4 times or I get an icky feeling. Even my boyfriend was on red alert when he noticed the door was unlocked. We entered my house and I was checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged it. It opened right up. I never leave that door unlocked. He witnessed me locking it on Sunday when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He saw me check it 4 times and I have not opened it since. We are both convinced that someone has been in my house. Whoever has been coming in somehow has a key. The fact that they left the sliding door unlocked makes me think that they are planning to come back with ill intentions. But if they have a key, why would they need to unlock the sliding glass door? Unless they're trying to avoid the security cameras at the front door of my building. Either way, I've already ordered a security system, but unfortunately it's not going to arrive for a few days. Any suggestions on anything I could do in the meantime to keep safe? Also, what do you guys think? Am I just being paranoid, or should I go with my gut on this one? Update, changed my locks the other day, and set up my security cameras. So far nothing else has happened. I haven't caught anything on the security cameras, other than my cat doing his thing during the day when I'm gone. My landlord got back to me about the security footage from the front door, and said that the only strangers he saw were buzzed into the building by residents, so no weirdos or previous tenants with a key. The police are still patrolling the neighborhood quite often, which definitely makes me feel more secure. I called the police this morning and talked to an officer who basically told me that, as for now, there's nothing that they can really do unless this escalates. But he did say it was right to call it in so they are aware that something might be happening. He also said getting security cameras is a good idea, as well as getting my landlord to change the locks. He also said that they will send a patrol car down my street every once in a while, just to make sure no one's lurking about. The story happened when I was in college. There was something about my early years in college that just seemed to bring on a slew of experiences that ranged from creepy to terrifying. I don't know what it was about that time in my life. This experience was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Anyway, one night at the beginning of summer, following my freshman year of college, some of my high school friends and I were at a party. We hadn't seen a ton of each other in the preceding year because of us all being away at college. Mostly just during school breaks and a few random weekends here and there, so we were all feeling kinda giddy about having the whole summer together. I wouldn't have normally gone to this party, hosted by someone else we went to high school with, but they all wanted to go, and I wanted to hang out with them, so I agreed. This is not the mistake I made in the story. That would come later on that night. We got to the party, and we realized it was almost exclusively people from high school, which was kinda nice actually. It was like a big reunion. Soon my prior inhibitions were gone, and that was only partially because I started throwing back screwdrivers the moment I got there. A couple hours later, I was more than a little tipsy. No, I was full on drunk, though not totally plastered yet, which proved to be my saving grace in the story. After a while, a group of my friends decided to split off. The host of the party, Stephanie, lived in her parents' house still, and it was in the middle of nowhere, basically near a forest. Forests at night both scare and enthrall me, so drunk me suggests that we go exploring. This is something my friends would not let me live down, like not ever. So anyway, this group, Lauren, Hillary, Jared, Alex, Hugo, Dean, and the hostess Stephanie, plus myself obviously, decided to go on a midnight walk through the woods. It was pretty creepy, not gonna lie, but in a cool way. At least I thought so. A couple people in the group namely Hillary and Alex, were pretty afraid. But Hillary wanted to go because her best friend was Lauren, and Alex had a thing for Hillary and Lauren, which was a whole thing, and not the point of the story. But because of that, they were both there. They kept making comments about how creeped out they were, and I kept telling them to relax. No one else is out here, I told them. Let's just enjoy this time together. Being drunk makes me weirdly sentimental. We walked through the forest for a bit, and then came up to a clearing with a lake and a dock with tall grass and shit, plus a shed and what turned out to be a boathouse, both of which had seen better days. Now, Stephanie and I weren't close, so this was my first time exploring this forest, but Dean and Hugo had before, and remembered this place. They mentioned that they thought Stephanie's parents forbid them from coming back there, because it wasn't their property, which was true. It was like suddenly, Stephanie realized where we were. I wasn't the only drunk one, and her eyes got super wide, and she looked nervous. Not scared exactly, more like she was worried that she was going to get in trouble, and she said that we should go back. I told her everything was fine, since she could totally trust the judgment of a drunk person, and because everyone else was drunk. They all agreed with me, except for Steph, but she was outnumbered and not about to go back alone. Even Hillary and Alex were okay with staying. And because logic is a friend to drunk people everywhere, I suggest we play hide and seek, and most everyone agreed. Honestly, I don't know why people kept listening to me. Now, if I had been sober, this was the kind of place I'd be kind of freaked out about. In a cool way, sure, but not in a let's play hide and seek kind of way. This is where things go wrong. Hugo was forced to be it because we were all assholes and told him he didn't have a choice, so he went into the woods and counted while we all ran and hid. I saw Dean dart into the shed, but everyone else ran into the woods. I decided to duck down in the tall grass, which varied in height. Sometimes I could kneel, and sometimes I had to be on my stomach to be totally concealed. As I was hiding, I heard voices in the trees nearby. Whispers, like the speakers were trying not to be heard. I was curious, so I made my way towards the voices, first on my hands and knees, and eventually army crawling as the grass got shorter. I nearly shit my pants when I ran into Stephanie in the grass, who turned out to be doing the same exact thing as me. When we got closer, we realized it was Lauren and Jared, and that was how Steph and I realized they liked each other. We were listening to them flirt and looking at each other, and I swear we had a telepathic conversation about how good they would be together. But that was when we heard someone barreling towards us through the grass. Heart pounding, I turned to see that it was just Hugo throwing himself down next to Stephanie and me, and he looked terrified. "Hugo, what the fuck?" I whispered because there was no way he counted as high as we were making him. We were being real jerks to Hugo that night. He looked around frantically, and then told us what had him spooked. I'll never forget the sheer terror I saw on Hugo's face and heard in his voice. "There's someone in the woods." Stephanie tried to tell him that it was probably just someone else from the party, but Hugo said no. He'd seen a guy and hid behind a tree, and this guy seemed to be in his 40s, and he said the guy looked rough too, and just had a bad feeling, so he booked it. It was just by chance that he found Stephanie and me. "He's looking for something, or someone," Hugo said, telling us that the guy was shining a flashlight around. As if on cue, someone came walking out of the woods, and then called out, "Jim, are you out here?" He sounded kind of angry, and now I felt stone cold sober. This wasn't right, and it was about to get worse because that's when we saw the shadow of someone rowing a boat down the lake towards the dock. The first guy walked onto the dock to meet the guy, Jim presumably, and I heard him demand, "Where is he?" The first guy sounded angry, like he was expecting someone else to be there too. And the second guy informed the first, "I fucked up." They proceeded to argue, though I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then they went into the boathouse. I'm pretty sure no one had hidden in there, but I worried about that, plus the fact that two shifty guys were doing what seemed to be pretty shifty things. We needed to get out of there. I knew that. But Dean was still in the shed, which was too close to the boathouse for comfort, given the situation. Lauren and Jared were now making out, and totally oblivious, and Hillary and Alex were fuck knows where. Why had I suggested hide and seek? That's what I kept asking myself when I tried to formulate a plan. Then we heard somebody running through the woods, but like they were trying to do it so quietly. I turned to see Hillary. It looked like she was trying to find somewhere else to hide, unaware of what was happening. I saw her run towards the boathouse. It was like time stopped. I didn't know what to do or how to stop her. Honestly, I froze. But then Hillary hesitated when she got close to the door. She would later tell us that the voices she heard inside gave her pause. And then the door swung open. It was like something out of a movie. Hillary was now hiding behind the open door, and the first guy stood in the doorway, looking around. I think he must have heard Hillary, who was not being nearly as quiet as she thought she was. If he closed the door from the outside, he'd see Hillary, and then we'd all be truly fucked. Luckily, he went back inside and closed the door. We had to get the hell out of there, but we still had to get Dean, Lauren, and Jared, as well as find Alex. We didn't have a lot of time, I didn't think, so we had to be fast. Then suddenly, Hugo stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed. He apparently thought we were in a movie. I just looked at him with a, "What the fuck, Hugo?" expression on my face. It was not what I would have done, but I'll be damned, it worked. Hillary came sprinting towards us, as did Alex, who was hiding behind the boathouse. Likewise, Dean emerged from the shed, and Lauren and Jared detached themselves from each other. The two men in the boathouse heard us too, and came busting out, but by this point we were all sprinting away. I swear, I never before nor since ran that fast. At one point, Stephanie tripped, and I practically ripped her arm out of the socket while pulling her to her feet. The guys chased us for a bit, though I don't know how long, because we kept running until we got back to Stephanie's house. The party was still going, and the men hadn't followed us beyond the woods, but we were all too freaked out to stay. I called my brother to come pick us up, and we all left, even Stephanie, who left her house unattended, except for all the drunk partygoers. We spent the night at my brother's house that night, and we went back to Stephanie's house to help clean up the next day, because honestly, this experience kind of bonded us in a way. Lauren and Jared are now married. Hillary and Alex were both in the wedding. I lived with Dean for a bit following college, and Hugo is one of my best friends, as is Stephanie, which is weird because we weren't really friends before that. But I swear, we thought we were gonna die that night, all of us, except maybe Lauren and Jared. Even Dean heard what was happening outside the shed, and was waiting for the right time to make his escape. You can't go through something like that and not come out closer. It's strange, but also kind of nice. Like we have this shared history, which was true before this because we all went to school together, but it's different now. I wanted to go back and investigate in the light of day, but only Dean wanted to go with me, and I thought maybe it wasn't enough people. I was still pretty spooked, though intrigued. Stephanie told us later that she had told her dad when her parents got home that day, and he and a few of his friends went back there and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They moved shortly thereafter, not because of this, so we never found out what happened, but we've also never forgotten it. So this happened a couple years ago when I was 13 and my brother was 11. My parents had to go out and thought it would be better to leave me and my brother home alone, so that's what they did. They left taking my little sister, who was 6, with them. My brother and I were all the way down in our basement, which is where we had our video games set up. So the two of us were just downstairs playing Mario Kart on the Wii. We had the home phone in between us, just in case our parents called. About an hour goes by, and the phone starts to ring. We look down at the caller ID, and it's our uncle. We decided to just let it ring, and how our phone worked, it would ring 5 times, then stop. 1 ring, 2 ring, 3, the phone stops ringing. And my brother doesn't pay any attention to it, but I do realize that the only reason to stop that early is if someone picked up, but we were home alone. I get really suspicious, and my paranoia gets the better of me. I take my brother and we go upstairs to see the phone is still there, but there's still a phone on the 3rd floor in my parents' room. We go towards the stairs, and what we saw chilled us to the bone. A man in his early 40s or 50s is all I can really tell you, because the second I saw him, my brother and I scream and run out the front door straight to our neighbor's house. We tell them what happened and they proceed to call the cops, then our parents. They come home fast and I don't know what's wrong with the man, but he never left the house. He just stood there. The police arrested him, and from what I heard, he was placed in a mental hospital, but that's just what I heard. The story might not be as crazy compared to others, but I just think of what could have happened to me and my brother if my uncle didn't decide to call. After reading through some of the human trafficking stories on here, I can't help but feel incredibly uneasy. My heart is racing at the thought of what I may have avoided. Long post, but it's worth it. For reference, my boyfriend is 6'3" and 275 pounds. He's very stocky, has a military-style haircut, usually wears a shirt with guns on it in some way, and has a fierce beard. This is important to this story. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved into a house with a couple of roommates near downtown in a big city of Michigan. I sent him to the store to get some staples while I started unpacking. He texted me just after getting to the store saying he had the weirdest thing happen in the parking lot, but that he would tell me when he got home. 10 minutes later, he texted me again saying that he was super creeped out and jokingly said, "If I'm not on my way in 5 minutes, send help." This is normal for his kind of humor. When he got home, he told me that he was on his way from the parking lot and a man stopped him, offering compliments on his beard. It happened a lot, so he didn't think much of it. The guy was dressed as if he was a lawyer or a real estate agent, with nice shoes on and a watch. Very clean cut, so he wasn't uncomfortable. He said thanks and began walking inside. The guy continued walking with him, asking him where he was from, what he did for a living, and if he had kids or a wife. My boyfriend's gut lit up like fireworks. After working in mental health, he knew to trust it. He made up some answers and told him to have a nice day. The man said, "If you're ever interested in a new line of work, you're just the guy I'm looking for." My boyfriend continued walking without responding and didn't look back. A few minutes into his shopping, he noticed that the same man was appearing in the same aisles as him, but would then turn around and go the other way. At one point, when he texted me, he was sure that the man had snapped a photo of him from the other end of the aisle. We both commented on the craziness and said, "That's some trafficking shit," but let it go, as it was over now, not really wanting to believe it. Days later, we run to the store to pick up some late night snacks. We parked the car what felt like miles away from the store. My boyfriend's the worst. And we began walking in. Thankfully, I don't really startle easily when we're out together, because we both have concealed carry, so I know if someone was attacking either of us, we're decently prepared. But I still jumped when a man's voice yelled out my boyfriend's name and added, "And his wife." My boyfriend said, "Keep walking," and didn't hesitate. Thankfully, I knew what he meant, and I hauled my ass into the entryway of the store, and I watched them talk while watching out for suspicious people or cars around them. When they were almost inside, I went into the store and started chatting with the greeter, so he didn't get the chance to talk to me. The man again showed up in the aisles that we were in, and at one point, looked to be texting on his phone, but was holding it up in front of him. I was almost positive that he was taking a picture of us. We didn't finish getting snacks and just left the store. I waited with the greeter as my boyfriend got the car, so I didn't have to walk through the dark parking lot. I've been a powerlifter at that point for a little over a year and was in great shape. I was in the gym every day at the same time due to my work schedule, and usually had my girl roommate with me, but today I was alone for a quick and light lifting session. I wasn't a minute into my gym time when the same guy walked in. I had never seen him there before and instantly felt like vomiting. I texted my boyfriend, but he was away for the military, so he was panicking from a distance. "Remember your training and keep your cool." He wasn't in gym attire and didn't have a bag with him. We were also in the gym furthest from the area that we live in. They had the best equipment for my personal needs and gains, so I'm not sure why he had chosen it, as he didn't have the "I love the gym" vibe. He came over and said hello, and I politely said hello back, but didn't continue the conversation. He said a few more things, and a guy a few machines over could tell that I was uncomfortable. He came over and pretended to be my friend, asking if I was ready to go. I said yes, and that I just needed to grab my things. The creeper man asked where my husband was, and I pretended not to hear him as I kept walking. When I came out, he was gone, but my new best fake friend was waiting at the bench outside the locker room. He said that the man had left, but he had let the staff know what happened, and they said that he wasn't even a member, but said he was there to pick up his girlfriend. My new best friend walked me to my car, and I switched gyms. Thankfully, we now live far, far away from this city, and I've never had an encounter with him, and neither has my boyfriend. I honestly believed that they were trying to recruit him to make big money selling women, and that I was just a bonus woman to sell. Thank God for strangers who stand up and save women. You will never realize just how important you are. My name is Thomas. I'm 33 years old. I'm a black man that lives in Baltimore City, better known as Bmore or Bodymore, in the urban area where it's dangerous. But when you live your whole life somewhere, you tend to adapt to the area. When I was 28 years old, I was robbed at gunpoint by two men. One day I was walking to my homeboy's house at 10 at night to buy some weed. His house was about 15 minutes away, and on the way back I went to the store because I had my cousin's independence card, so I was definitely going to buy some munchies for after I smoke. On my way back home I saw a white car pass by and turned on the street a block away from me. Mind you, I had my earphones in, but don't have anything playing just in case someone tries something and I would still be able to hear them. When I went by the block where the car went, a black guy hopped out of the car and tried to catch up with the pace I was walking. When I saw what he was doing, I heard him say something. I then took one of the earbuds out of my ear and said, "What the fuck you say?" He then said, "Kick that shit, don't play with me." That's when I saw the silver gun he was clutching in his coat. I had a bag full of junk food in my hand and a bag full of weed in my shoe. He said, "Where's the money?" I said I don't have no money, just a bag of weed. That's when another black guy hopped out of the car. He had a gun in his hand too. He went to the right side of me. Another guy was on the left of me. I took my shoe off and threw the bag of weed on the ground and said that's all I got. He said, "Put your shoe back on," looking around nervously. In my head, I was like, they're not just going to kill me right here. I'm going to try to get the fuck out of here. So the guy on the left said, "Yo, if you don't pull the dollars out of your pocket, I'm going to shoot you." I pulled my pants up a little bit more because I was preparing to run. And before I said anything, I sprinted up the street in the direction I was already walking. It was about 3 minutes away. While I was running, I'm passing people on the sidewalk. They're looking crazy because I think they saw the whole robbery. But when I got 2 blocks away from my house, I ran to the parking lot and headed by a gate that had a lot of high bushes and trees. I caught my breath right there. I couldn't run no more, but I didn't stay long because I was scared and didn't know if they were chasing me. I got the hell up and jogged the rest of the way to my house, and when I got into the house, I was out of breath. I sat down and told my 8-year-old little cousin, "Remember I was telling you how dangerous it was going out at 10 p.m. at night?" I was telling him earlier that day about another time I got robbed and how dangerous it is to be out at night in Baltimore City. Growing up, I spent every summer vacation at my grandparents' house in rural Tennessee. When I say rural, I mean their town was literally a cluster of homes with a singular one-lane road as the only way in and out. 45 minutes from the nearest freeway on-ramp, 30 minutes to a grocery store, and an hour and a half to a Sam's Club, Costco. My grandparents still live there and make the drive monthly, but fuck that. What I'm trying to say is, it's as remote as it gets. I'd play outside for hours and hours and maybe see 2 or 3 cars. It's a lot more built up now, but it was nice while it lasted. It was around 11:30 p.m. and me and my dad couldn't sleep because it was an especially hot and muggy night. We decided to take a drive through the hilly, curvy back roads that I absolutely loved and still do. There was a scenic access site that was just a clearing overlooking a cliff about 15 minutes further into the woods from my grandparents' house. It wasn't very well known. It was down a narrow, 2-track lane with a couple of dilapidated trailers lining it every quarter mile roughly. Due to the isolation and lack of any real police presence, this area was full of meth during this time, and there was a local rumor of some inbred cult in the woods. Keep in mind, it was the middle of the night by the time we got to the parking lot for the overlook, which was just a gravel pit. My dad has always had a bit of a intuition and asked me if I really wanted to get out of the car. That made me hesitate, but I saw the amount of lightning bugs that were out, and catching them was my favorite pastime. Armed with a flashlight and an old Tupperware container with some holes drilled in it, we set off down the path to the cliff. We immediately heard noises in the woods, heavy footsteps. Way too heavy for a deer, and there weren't really bears present in this area. The woods were usually quiet, besides that. We both thought we saw something hide behind one of the trees out of the corner of our eyes, and I didn't realize he saw it too until we brought it up in the car, and vice versa. Here's where it gets freaky. Once we made it down the path to the cliff, we saw an outline of a man. He was about my dad's height, 5'10", but he was as thin as the rail. He couldn't have weighed more than 120 pounds. Here's the thing. He wasn't admiring the beautiful moonlight scenery over the cliff. He was standing perpendicular to it, just staring off into the trees, perfectly still. My dad slightly nudged me in the direction of our car. As I started walking back, he shined a flashlight on the man. As soon as the light was shined on the man, my dad gasped and dropped the flashlight before literally picking me up and sprinting full force back to our car. As we peeled out, I had no idea what the fuck was going on. "His face looked like a goddamn melted candle," he said after a few minutes of silence, after we had pulled out to the main road. Apparently, the man had no nose, just 2 nostril holes on his face. The way he was described sounded like he was a burn victim. We brought it up to my grandma the next day at breakfast. She immediately turned pale. Apparently, there was a meth lab explosion up in the hills a few months prior, and they were unable to rebuild the building, so they resorted to making their product in the woods. And were very defensive, even homicidal about their stash. This is my first time telling a story, so here's a little detail you should know. I live in a city where there's a lot of wannabe gangsters of a few gangs close to our city. Also my mom, who's like a mother bear. She's really protective of me. She doesn't let me take public transportation or stay late outside of the house. This happened a year ago, after my senior year of high school. My girlfriend, who's a year younger, has strict parents, so at the time she didn't have a phone. Me being me, I called up my best friend, who actually lives quite close to her summer school she'd be attending. Basically every morning my grandma would drop me off at his house. I didn't have my license, and I'd just tell my mom that we were hanging out. However, we used to take 2 buses to my girlfriend's summer school, so I could see her before class started. We did this for a while. Everything was great. My mom wasn't suspicious of anything. We never ran into any problems. It was a good time. However, what happened made me realize why my mom was always overprotective. My friend and I were on the bus enjoying the ride to our last stop. A guy in a hoodie, looking in his 40s or so, with a duffel bag, yelled at the entire bus to move along so the ladies could get through. My friend, who's kind of a loudmouth, told the man to calm down. Oh boy, did he mess up. The man was so angry, his eyes were bloodshot red, popping out of the sockets, yelling at my friend, "Don't get lippy with me." His spit was going everywhere. He kept repeating his own name. He then slaps my friend across the face and starts pushing him while we're on the bus. He claims to be a gang member. I kinda laughed on the inside because the man looked like a painter, not a gang member. I'm known for being a strong guy, but something in my gut was telling me not to do anything crazy, and the most I did was push the man with one hand. He went flying and fell to the seat. He gave one giant last slap to my friend and spit on the floor. So there I am, my friend beat red, a bus full of people who didn't do anything, and a crazy man who just assaulted a minor. Eventually, we got to our stop, and there he was, on the other side of us, right beside my girlfriend's summer school. He didn't seem to pay any attention to us. He was just messing around with his bag. My friend gave the idea to jump the guy. I was ready. I was happy to beat him. However, something in my gut was telling me not to. It wasn't fear, it was more of a sign. As the man was getting closer, I decided that we'd hop into the gas station that was right next to us. We told the man working there to lock the doors, as we panicked as he was inches away from the door. One of the workers was outside and told the man to leave, and he did. We called the police. An officer showed up and got a statement from my friend and informed us that he was actually just arrested only a few minutes after. The adrenaline I was feeling was crazy. I was bigger than the man and could have easily taken him if I wanted to, but I'm a softie at heart and like to stay away from confrontation. As we cross the street, we see something on the ground that makes me sick to my stomach. I knew my gut feeling was right. A huge knife was laying there, and it made me sick to my stomach that this man had it on him. It made sense now. This man, who was a scrubby skinny guy, seemed to have zero fear whatsoever towards two kids that could beat the hell out of him. And why did he drop it? Did he even know he dropped it? So many things were racing through my head. A dude on the bus did in fact tell me that he was dangerous and goes to jail often, but this was crazy. My mom, my dad, my girlfriend. What if I didn't make it out alive that day? And what if my friend and I ended up on the news? What would they think? So crazy dude on the bus, let's not meet again. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to the storms up north, we traveled straight west instead of northwest at first, and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we were far enough north, we turned west onto the I-90. At that point, it had been over an hour since we saw anywhere that might have had a public restroom, and we were on the state routes, so no rest stops. Those of you who have traveled with young kids know that that's close to their bladder's limit, and our daughter was begging us to stop somewhere to go pee. South Dakota was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop, as my at the time 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pulled in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think much of it at first, until I started opening my door. My head turned to the right, where the truck was parked, a couple spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy, straggly gray-brown beard, with dark eyes. I could see that he was wearing a dingy, dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband I didn't want to go into the rest stop alone because of this guy and the weird feeling I got from him. He thought I was being a little silly, but agreed to come with us. At that point, the next stop was Wall, South Dakota, about 100 miles according to the huge billboards we passed advertising it. He thought it was better to empty his bladder, even though he didn't particularly feel the need. I grabbed my daughter and we headed inside, followed by the guy who finished rummaging at his truck, but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and headed back out the lobby. As I expected, my husband already was out there since he didn't have to chaperone a small child. The old guy was also in the teeny lobby area. He was just standing there, staring at my husband. My husband rushed us back to the car. As we were buckling in, he locked the doors. He told me that the guy hadn't gone into the restrooms and was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might have just had a close call, and he was glad that it hadn't just been me and my daughter out there. However, that's not the end of the story. Remember how I mentioned Wall and that it was 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the episode was behind us, except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some road snacks, plus look around the homely but fun little tourist trap in the middle of nowhere. We saw the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us. Same face, beard, dirty plaid shirt. Thankfully, we had already eaten, so since he was staring at us again, we quickly paid for our snacks and trinkets and got the heck out of there. Thankfully, we didn't see him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming, safely with no other sight of that truck. So I'm new to Reddit and found this sub, and think this story fits here. I've had a number of odd, frightening experiences in the woods since. I'm a huge outdoors guy, and pretty much outside all the time I can manage it. So this happened when I was much younger. I want to say freshman in high school, probably around 2008. There used to be this road near where I lived, in California, called Crook Road. It was barely a road. No one traveled on it, and it was surrounded by small patches of forest and abandoned barns and houses. I would typically go there with my friends to skateboard and hang out. This one night, I was hanging out with two of my friends, Lucas and Dorian, and someone wanted to go to Crook Road to hang out since it was creepy at night. It might sound lame, but we loved exploring like a bunch of 5th graders, and weren't really into smoking or anything, so what else was there to do? I asked my then 20-year-old brother James if he could drive us down into one of the nature reserves by that road. This specific reserve was larger than the others and had a network of gravel paths leading through it. Basically, we were looking for unexplored territory to hike on. Soon, one particular path we were traveling down had become so narrow, James' Ford Explorer couldn't pass through it. So we got out and walked for a while, chatting and just having fun. We walked through the woods for about a half hour, until it had gotten relatively dark out and the sun was gone, at which point we turned around to head back to the car. It's now I should mention that despite being near a lot of subdevelopments, this patch of forest was huge. I'd say about 1,000 acres, and rarely visited since it was easy to get lost in, especially at night. It was challenging to get the car turned around, but James managed it, and we're off down the road. Dorian proposed that we turn down a different path we had passed earlier since we had about another 40 minutes until our parents wanted us back, and we agreed. Down this path was a tiny pond Dorian wanted to check out and take pictures since he hadn't got the opportunity to visit it at night. It was slow going since the road was even crappier than the main one that we were traveling on that turned off a Crook Road. Minutes later, we got into a slight argument. Dorian was convinced that James had taken the wrong turn since we should have arrived at the pond by now, while James claimed that he had been driving straight the whole time. It was dark after all. Eventually, we came up to a fork in the road, and none of us were familiar with it. None of us knew which way to go, so we ended up guessing and going left, hoping that both directions ultimately led back to the main path. None of us were scared or anything. In fact, we were actually excited and intrigued, driving through the middle of nowhere at night. It was at this point where we rounded a small bend in the road, and the headlights fell upon a surreal sight. There were 4 figures emerging from the forest and crossing the road, wearing what looked like large cloaks and hoods up, holding flashlights. One guy at the back of the group was dragging a large duffel bag, a human-sized duffel bag. We all froze and stopped mid-conversation. As soon as our high beams landed on the 4 figures, they froze as well. James pulled to the left and went around them. Driving past them felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been going over 5 miles per hour due to the shitty road conditions. Sitting in the passenger seat, I could see them inches beyond my window, and they were indeed wearing black robes and holding flashlights. I didn't get a good look at the bag, but judging by the way the guy was holding it, something heavy was inside that bag. None of us said a word until the road straightened out, and we were far past these guys, at which point James muttered, "What the hell was that?" We continued down the road in silence until I heard Lucas say, "Holy shit," and repeated himself in a louder, panicked voice. "They're fucking coming back." I twisted around in my chair to see Lucas pointing out the back window. I could barely see anything, but about 100 yards away we saw beams of 4 lights, shaking erratically. The guys were without a doubt running after us. All of us screamed for James to floor it, and he sped down the road. The car was bouncing and shaking uncontrollably as we flew over the berms and potholes. I kept my eyes on the flashlight beams until we rounded another bend in the road, and they were out of sight. Thankfully, the path managed to take us back to the main path. James gunned it down the main path until we popped off by Croak Road and got the hell out of there. The weirdest thing about it was, there couldn't have been a vehicle anywhere near those guys for 50 miles in each direction. We would have seen one if there had been. We had explored most of those areas before, and there wasn't anywhere to pull off the road and park. We didn't say anything more until we were back at my place. We talked about it for a bit, and then my friends went home, and James and I went to bed. I didn't know if I should call the cops or not, but James, who I guess would be the adult in the situation, seemed reluctant, so I dropped it. I never told my parents until just before writing this, and they kinda scolded me for not telling them, and that we should have contacted the authorities, just to report suspicious people in the preserve. I still wish to know how the hell they got there, where they were going, and what was in the bag. This didn't happen to me, but a close friend of mine. He told me the story a few hours ago, and I wanted to share it here, since I don't think he has a Reddit account. For the purpose of the story, I'll call my friend Jordan. Anyways, he lives in Hayward, and was attending a march for the Black Lives Matter movement, at around 4 p.m. I think. I don't know what street or anything specific like that. He had just sent me a couple videos of the crowd marching and taking a knee. So after about 10 minutes, he said that they were passing through a street lined with shops and alleyways. There was an old man sitting on the curb by one of the alleyways, watching the march. Jordan describes the man as looking in the upper 40s, wearing a black and white flannel shirt and jeans with a cap. Jordan had the misfortune of walking nearby said alley, and the man stopped him, saying something along the lines that he needed help fixing his passenger seat since the recliner handle was broken, and it was a two-person job to get it back into its upright position. The man gestured towards his car. It was a black Chevy Malibu that was parked possibly in the most sketchiest part of the alley, right towards the back, kind of hidden behind the trash dumpster. Jordan declined and quickly walked away before the man could say anything else. Now for his sake, I wish the story ended there, but I wouldn't be posting it if it had. I think sometime later, like an hour maybe, Jordan decided to start heading home while the march continued. He said he was cutting across some field that was between houses, where only 2 other people were in sight. As soon as he emerged on the other side, his air was suddenly cut off as a thick arm wrapped around his throat and began aggressively yanking him backwards. Of course, Jordan yelled as loud as he could, and thankfully, the aforementioned 2 guys began to rush to his aid, shouting at Jordan's attacker. The guy let go and pushed Jordan. As Jordan stumbled forward, he spun around and saw that it was the guy who had asked him for help with his car. He hopped into his Chevy Malibu and sped off. The other 2 people asked Jordan if he was okay and comforted him and whatnot. Keep in mind, Jordan only told me this in a few texts, and I haven't got a chance to talk to him about it, so some details were spared. I think Jordan contemplated calling the police, but didn't think it was worth it. He told me that they were probably already busy enough, and he might be ignored, or have an extremely long response time, to which the only information he had was a description of the guy and the car. He hadn't got the license plate number. Jordan then went home, and that's pretty much all he's told me so far. It might sound cliche, but please everyone, stay safe. These are terrible times, and with all the looting and protests, stuff like this is bound to happen. I was 16 in my last year of high school. It was a normal boring day like any other. I was in class working away and wishing lunch would come quick. I wasn't in the mood to work, but that suddenly changed. We got an announcement from the principal saying Code Black. I looked at the code sheet and read that Code Black is a lockdown. I said to myself, awesome, no work, but I knew it could be serious, and I had to be sensible and listen to my teacher in case something bad happened. My teacher quickly locked the door, shut the curtains on the windows, and covered the glass window on the door with a huge sheet of paper. I heard a few other teachers rush out into the foyer to lock the 2 doors. Our grade foyer is a huge room. Right outside our 5 classrooms in our grade block is a huge classroom where we have grade assemblies, and we can hang out there all recess and lunch. I wasn't scared. I'm not really scared of anything, but it was quiet. The quietest I've ever heard our grade block. In fact, the whole school felt silent. It felt like it was the weekend and no one was there. I sat on a bench seat, which was close to the door. I tried to look through one side of the window on the door to see if I could see anyone on the school grounds through one of the foyer windows, but the windows were covered up too much. A few people started whispering to each other, and I told them to shut up, that I was trying to listen out for noises, like voices and the sound of forced entry. But nothing, not a single sound. It started to be a little freaky, as we sat in our dark classroom completely silent. All these questions started running through my mind. What was going on? Is it in or outside our school grounds? Are we safe? Is it deadly? Are we going to be attacked? What the hell is it? I was expecting that we were going to be attacked, so I fully prepared for it. But after a very long while, we got an all clear and went about our day. At lunch, rumors were going around saying that some idiot in our grade, who I hated, held the assistant principal at knife point. He also had a list of people he wanted to kill, including one of my friends. I think he was expelled, as there were no rumors about the aftermath, so it just turned out to be a crazy day. A few months later, I was working away in class. I was in a good mood for once, but little did I know that that day was about to get better. It was almost lunch when the principal made a Code Gray announcement. I looked at the sheet, and the Code Gray is someone untrustworthy around the school. We didn't have to barricade ourselves in all grades, just needed the foyer doors locked for safety, and we were instructed to continue working while the situation was being handled. I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. I wanted to see whatever it was, and my wish came true. At lunch, we gathered in the foyer. It was a bit crowded, as I said. There were 2 security guards over the grade 8 block talking to a girl student. The conversation started to get a bit heated. I was praying for a fight, but she walked away up the front of the school towards the office, with security right on her tail. We watched closely till they were out of sight. There were no rumors, but I remember teacher saying that someone was just having a bad day. Now here's the best part. I was in my first year of college. I was catching my bus home. I was in the back, alone, eating lunch, when this girl who was in my grade 7 class, high school, boarded and sat with me. We talked a bit, and when I brought up the 2 incidents, she told me it was her who caused the Code Gray. From what I remember, she wanted to bash this 8th grade girl real bad for some reason, and security escorted her off the school grounds and to the parking lot where the cops were waiting for her. However, when she walked up the soccer field and tried to run, but was tackled and handcuffed before she knew it. I can't remember the rest of the story, however, I'll always have these 2 incidents, and I'll have a laugh with others about them. I have a story that isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell us the story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift between the locals on the reservation, with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came up with a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. The reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to get to sleep when all of a sudden, their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under the table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After 5 minutes, it stopped. The next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they get quiet and then tell them to leave. Mark started to think that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. Then they go to a convenience store, and they are talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their soul. They just walked out of there, baffled. They thought it was just another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw 3 animals run off. 2 were wolves, and 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on their 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared them so bad that they called the mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl had been relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick up Jimmy from the airport. The road they traveled went through some boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and then they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We're driving through some dangerous areas at night, so we can't make any stops, so if you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak Mark out. "I'm not kidding. Go do your business." Jimmy was insistent that he was fine, so they hit the road. As they were 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to go pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on. "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you have to do your business next to the door, and if I say get in the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right." He opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark are freaking out. "What's going on?" The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car, to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer, and they were going 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for about 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They hadn't spoken through the rest of the ordeal. Jimmy says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." This happened a few years ago when my family was traveling out west. We were traveling through Saskatchewan late at night, and I was in the front seat with my dad, talking to him, helping him stay awake. We were on a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere. and it was one of those places out in the prairies with literally no trees and barely any buildings for kilometers. I don't remember the last town we had gone through, but it was a good 30 kilometers back, and I remember the next town we went through was a good distance after this encounter. After driving for a while, we see this guy on the side of the road just staring at our car as we drove by. He wasn't hitchhiking or anything, and didn't have a car or bike or anything with him. He just stood in the grass right by the road staring at us and watching us go by. This was in the middle of nowhere, no trees, no farmhouses nearby, just a guy in a white shirt and jeans in the middle of nowhere. Needless to say, my dad stepped on the gas after that. It was definitely one of the strangest things I've seen, and wondered what could have driven someone to just be out on the road at night in the middle of nowhere like that. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I never had much luck with women, and ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either, until like the third month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which is odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for about a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I have been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit of badgering from her, I finally said that I would take a drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week, called on most days. I just assumed that I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, while making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she would send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I chalked it up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding her house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads, and a large thicket of trees. It was still midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of the car to knock on the door, I noticed that someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me that your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or?" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking through the window at me from the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said, "You gotta get out of here, now." We both ran to our cars. When I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there, and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving my address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I'd seen the guy last. He was looking at us from that window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took a half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, as the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that they didn't find anyone. They did find the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure that the house was empty. After the cops left, she asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be alone in the house right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bedroom was the room that was right next to where the man had been. Katie had also brought out a shotgun that her father had given her, but she has never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying that she'll feel safer if it's out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of the doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been at the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened, and we called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a full sweep of the woods, but found no one. They told Katie and me that it's probably a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother, telling him what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. The fucking man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there, and didn't even bother calling the police again. However, I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call the cops again. I don't think Katie ever went back to the house alone. This happened about 6 years ago, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. It was fiesta season, and me and my mom and sister were going downtown to drop my sister off because she was going to help my mom's friend with her food stand. As my mom and I started to walk away towards the street, we stood at the sidewalk waiting to cross. This man, who was probably in his mid-20s, came and stood next to us. No big deal, right? Well, when the sign said that we could walk across, this burgundy-colored truck, which I want to say is a 2000 model, came racing by. Well, most of you would just call him a jerk and move on. Well, this wasn't the case in this situation. It turns out that the man that was standing next to me and my mom, well, somehow his arm got caught in the driver's side window. The man started yelling over and over again for them to stop their car. He finally stopped the car, and it turned out the man who was standing next to us the whole time was an off-duty police officer. The man that was in the car was an old man, around his mid-70s at the time. The officer took away the old man's keys and told him to stay there for a second. The officer was being very calm and respectful, so me being 8 years old at the time, I didn't understand why the next part happened. The officer had my mom and I stay because we witnessed what happened from the beginning to the end, and if this went to court, they'll want more evidence of what went down. Well, when the officer walked away, I took a good look at the old man, and God, this guy looked like he had been beaten up by life. He had rotten teeth, leathery dark skin, and scruffy knotted hair. When I took a good look at him, I noticed he was reaching for something shiny in the passenger seat. Once he got a grip on it, I immediately knew what it was. It was a pistol, and I got scared and yelled, "Gun, gun, he has a gun!" The officer heard me scream and ran faster than I've ever seen anyone run and grabbed the man before he could pull the trigger and started yelling, drop the gun right now." My mom grabbed me by the arm and we ran off when another off-duty officer stopped us and asked what was wrong. My mom out of breath and me crying, realizing how close I was to death. We finally managed to yell some slurred words. Man, car, gun, officer needs help. And that was enough for the officer to know what just happened and said, "Go run somewhere safe. If you see another officer, tell them to call for help. If you don't find one, call 911. He ran to help. When my mom and I started running again, I took one last look before my mom said not to look and turned my head away. But what I saw before my mom made me look away was traumatizing. I saw 2 officers pulling the man out of the car and the second one trying to get the gun away. My mom and I finally found another officer, and I told him everything, mostly because I saw more than my mom could describe. The officer wrote down everything and started to head in the direction my mom told him, and we went home. That day has traumatized me for life. and I have been scared and haven't celebrated Fiesta ever since. Now I only watch the festival on TV. My mom still goes and doesn't remember everything that happened, like me. Last year was the first time in a long time to go to Fiesta, because I had to be there, because my friend's mom was going to get proposed to that day and that place. I was very paranoid to the point that people were asking if I was okay. Now I'm 14 years old and I'm starting high school this year, but every now and then I think back to that time where I could have been dead if it wasn't for that officer risking his own life to save a mother and an 8-year-old girl he didn't even know. So to the officer that saved me and my mom, I wish I had the chance to thank you, and I hope you're doing great. You've inspired me to work hard and take action when necessary. I want to be a doctor in the Navy so I can help people. And to that old man, I don't know who you are or where you are, but if I see you again, I want you to know I still remember what you look like. And if you recognize me, you better turn the other way, because while I may be 5'2", 14 years old, I'm a lot stronger now. And I can take down my 24-year-old brother, who can lift over 200 pounds. I won't hesitate beating you up for scaring me for life. I'm a 26-year-old who has lived in Alaska my whole life. This will become important later when you see just how far this person would go to try to be with me. This all happened a few years back when I was in college. Like any woman at my age, I made a grave mistake of attempting online dating. I was using OkCupid to try and find a potential partner, but I also had listed in my bio that I was looking for friends. One day this girl, we'll call her Jen, messaged me. She seemed nice, and we got to talking and really hit it off, but I made it clear at this time I wasn't looking for a relationship due to being preoccupied with work and school. I should preface the rest of the story by saying that I'd like to help people, and it's really hard for me not to. Honestly, it has been the biggest flaw I've had over the years, a contributing factor in multiple abusive relationships I've been in before and since this incident. Anyway, the results of this has been that I tend to drain myself to try to help others, and it attracts unsavory and unstable people. We start going into conversation about our various interests, and eventually we stumble across gaming as a mutual interest. Jen suggests we play a new game, Ark Survival Evolved. It's a cursed rune of games that wasn't very optimized for any system. To be honest, it was an absolute dumpster fire of a game, but at the time I thought it had a lot of potential. So I spent countless hours making various bases and trading dinosaurs. Jenny and I spent a lot of time in the multiplayer, building things and training dinosaurs, and talking and having a good time. During this time, she opened up to me about a lot of the abuse she had suffered in past relationships, and from family that didn't accept her for being gay. Having also been through some difficult times, I felt a lot of empathy for her, and would try to build her up and talk her out of self-hating talk when I had the energy to. This is when the trouble started though. I had noticed that she had been a bit too friendly with me and kept being overtly sexual and flirting for a week or two. It all started in the game, roleplay kind of stuff. She was really nice, but totally not my type. I had to address the situation multiple times, saying that it made me feel very uncomfortable. But every time we had that conversation, Jen would tell me that she understood and would back off. You know the drill. It never got through to her. By this time, we had started having communications on a chat app called Telegram. I wasn't always on my computer, so it seemed like a convenient solution. I started noticing that a lot of the emojis she was using displayed a very similar lack of respect for my boundaries. Just as before, I'd mentioned this to Jen, that it made me feel uncomfortable. I knew she had a lot going on upstairs, but me being me, I have always been a gentle soul. It's always been very difficult for me to set firm boundaries and to keep those, especially when someone is suffering. One week I was very busy with homework and a double shift at work, so I ended up getting home very late. I booted up my computer just to check some emails as I ate dinner before zonking out. When Steam loaded, I noticed that I had 100 missed messages and comments, all from Jen. About 30 minutes later, my phone starts going off. Mind you, this is at 12 a.m. Alaskan time, so this would have been 3 a.m. for her. She called my cell phone number with what she had saved from Telegram. She was absolutely out of control. From the moment I picked up the phone, she was screaming obscenities and slurs, intercepted with confessions of love and desperate pleas for me to unblock her so that we could be friends again and that she would make it up to me and all that crap. I tried to explain to her that what she had done was out of line and that I just didn't have the emotional capacity to go through another abusive relationship, but she was having absolutely none of it. I did the only thing I could do. I ended the call and blocked her number. 5 minutes later, I get a call from an unrecognized private number and pick up, knowing exactly what I was in for. It was her again, calling from her parents' landline. I immediately hung up. 15 seconds goes by and my phone rings again. I dismissed the call. My phone rang again about 5 minutes later from the same number. This goes on for a solid 15 minutes before I turned off my phone and went to bed. It was a fairly sleepless night, but thankfully the next day I had class in the evening, so I had the opportunity to sleep in. I woke up from my okay sleep and turned my phone on to find over 100 missed calls and about as many voicemails. I checked my Telegram to talk to a different friend about the chaos that was going on to find messages from 6 new accounts. Most of them just off-the-wall text filled with the same out-of-control ramblings that she had said on the phone. They were the texts of someone who had completely lost it, all over the place, in tone and message, switching back and forth between "I love you" and awful slurs, with little regard of spacing, punctuation, capitalization, or general legibility. I was horrified. I mean, I had seen a fair share of breakdowns, but never ones that impacted me directly. Then I got a phone call, same unknown private number, hoping that she had calmed down enough to reason. I picked up the phone and she started sobbing and screaming, starting right back in. Mad as hell, I screamed into the phone for her to shut up, and for the first time in probably 14 hours, she did. Very clearly, I told her not to call me again, and that she had gone way over the line, and I wanted nothing to do with her after this. In a calm, monotone voice, she makes me shudder to this day when she said, "What do I have to do to prove my love for you? Do you want me to kill myself? How about my dog? I can kill her for you." Honestly, I was shocked. I just told her no, and that if she loved me, she would move on and get help. This was the worst possible answer. Immediately, she started screaming again. I hung up. I'm shaking again, just remembering this all. She called me back consistently for the rest of the morning, until I turned my phone off. The next day I went in and got my number changed, hoping that would be the end of it. A few days passed, and I'm at work. My boss comes over to me saying that there's a call from my mom. I thought nothing of it until I picked up the phone and heard Jen's voice on the other end. She started talking about how she had started cutting herself, and how she would keep going until she was dead if I didn't unblock her. So I hung up the phone without a word. I told my boss to not bother me with phone calls unless it was from a known listed number on my emergency contact file. With my new phone, I set up Telegram again and started going through blocking all of her other accounts, but this still wasn't the end of it. For about 6 months after the whole thing went down, every few weeks I would get a new Telegram contact on a new number begging me to unblock her so we could be together. I know it's not some big climactic end, but honestly, what could I do? All I knew of her at the time was her first name, screen name, and state. If I had reported to the police, nothing would have been done anyways. The cops here don't take kindly to queer people like myself, so I just didn't want to risk any BS with them. Oh, and to the Jen, the out-of-control lesbian from Ark Survival Evolved, I hope you've gotten help, but please let's never meet again. When I was 13, my family moved from a village to a city. The city had a fairly high homeless rate, so of course, there was a lot of people looking for somewhere to stay. So there's the old family friend who runs a leasing agent who lets me use some of the unoccupied houses as sort of a recording studio. I record music in my spare time, as long as I keep it clean, and clear out and make myself scarce for a while when there are viewings, and it works fine for me. So one of the houses on the outskirts of a city I was in for a while, about 2 years back, had a weird lock. Sometimes it would lock properly, and sometimes it wouldn't. So one night, around 8, I lock up and started cycling back home, which at this time took about 40 minutes. So I was home about 9:45. I started to play my PS4. About an hour later, I realized I forgot my wallet. So I cycled back, got my wallet, and decided to check the rooms, just because I hadn't locked the door properly. So I go upstairs and open one of the rooms. Lo and behold, there was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, laying on the bed, as if he owned the home. Both of us just looked at each other, startled. I guess we came to some sort of non-verbal agreement, and I showed him out. Creepy shit. So random homeless guy, I wouldn't mind meeting to hear your story. Just not at midnight in a house you're not supposed to be in. A few years ago when I was 17, I was at a county fair. It was around 11 at night, and I was standing there with my friends, talking and eating. To understand what happened next, you have to understand it was crowded and loud. An older man approached me and told me a lady needed my help. I moved away from my friends to try to hear what he was saying. We were near one of the exits to the parking lot. The man walked me to the exit, but I wouldn't exit with him. The whole parking lot was dark, packed full of cars, and there was no people out there. He was pointing out to the parking lot and trying to rush me, frantically saying, "She's over there. Hurry, she needs your help." I kept asking, "Where? I don't see anyone." I couldn't even see far because all the large trucks and vans blocked the view of the whole lot. The man said, "She's behind that car," and started pulling my arm. I wouldn't let him pull me and said, "No, I can't see anyone." Then he pointed to the opposite direction of the parking lot and said, "Over there." I looked. The only person I could see off in the distance was someone pushing a big cart with trash bins on it. And I said, "That's someone who works here." Then I walked away from him really fast and went back into the fair. My friends asked me where the heck I went. They didn't even see me leave. When I told them, everyone was tripping out that I almost got kidnapped. It was embarrassing. I felt really stupid. It's so creepy to imagine what could have happened. I thought that was only something I had to worry about when I was little. I don't want to meet him again, and sometimes think about anyone else who has met him in similar situations, and it worries me. So background. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a semi-small city with a low crime rate, at least back in the day when I was 14. It was such a quiet, nice city, and no one even locked their doors. People would say hi to each other on the streets. You could pretty much go to anyone's house for dinner, and their parents wouldn't get too nervous about it. You could walk home by yourself at night from your middle school basketball game without fear, which is what I was doing this particular night. It had been a long game and went later than normal. My parents both had to work in the morning, so they didn't go, so they could get to bed early, which is fine because they went to all my other games. It was about an 8-minute walk from my middle school to home, so there weren't really any concerns for my safety. So I'm walking, right? I'm wearing a pink sweater and jeans over my basketball jersey. My hair is a sweaty mess, but I was in a good mood because it was a good game. I was walking in a relaxing fashion, unconcerned and unaware, and that's when I felt it. I can't explain how I knew, but I just knew I was in some sort of danger. I looked around me, and parked near the blacktop fence was a Jeep with its lights off. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew someone was, for some reason. I ducked my head and walked away from it, hoping that I didn't catch their attention. No such luck. The Jeep followed me. It pulled up next to me, and I saw the window open, and I fucking booked it. Didn't look back, just ran. I had such a negative feeling about this Jeep. I didn't stop until I could see my house, and I thought I was safe. Just as I stopped to catch my breath, I heard the engine rev behind me, and it was the same Jeep, tearing it down my street, beelining towards me. I was in a position where I couldn't run anywhere safe in time, because I was in a big open space near the road, so I just stood there frozen in terror. I was backing up, and must have looked every bit the victim with my sweaty hair and white face, because just as the Jeep pulled up near me and the door opened, some guy across the street yelled something. I don't even know what the guy said, but the Jeep's door slammed shut and peeled away. I didn't even thank the guy, which I feel bad about because he might have just saved me from something horrible, but I just ran home. I threw myself inside and slammed the door behind me, scaring the shit out of my mom, who was just heading to bed. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her, and she woke up my dad. We considered calling the police, but since I didn't have a facial description or a license plate, there wasn't much to give them. All I knew is it was a dark Jeep and it chased me. After that night, my parents never let me walk home from school again. A week later, the newspaper said that there had been a gang rape of a young woman at a nearby parking garage 5 minutes away from my house, and a Jeep was mentioned. Let's call her Sam. All throughout high school, and even a bit afterwards, we were best friends. Even though we were best friends, I felt like I didn't really know her, if that makes sense. We were pretty wild teenagers, drinking, smoking, hanging out with older guys. Sam always dated super sketchy guys. When we were 16, Sam started dating a 27-year-old named John. Disgusting, I know. I had my fair share of dating guys way too old for me as well, so I didn't really see anything wrong with it at the time. Also, predators have a sketchy way of making you feel like there's nothing wrong with what they are doing. I had my fair share of trauma due to older men from that time in my life, but that's a story for another time. She didn't have a car at the time, so she would regularly ask me to drop her off at places to hang out and cover for her for mom contacting me, because this relationship obviously was hidden from her mom. Being a teenager, I was like, sure, whatever. She's my homegirl, and she would do the same thing for me. Plus, I met John several times before, and he seemed decent enough at the time. Please keep in mind, I was also a teenager at the time, and obviously now realize that he's a predator, and that it was wrong. He would give us alcohol and stuff, and would invite us over to party with him and his equally disgusting friends. Their relationship seemed fine at first, but turned toxic within a few months. I mean, duh. He was a grown man manipulating a little girl. He would constantly demand to track her phone location and control what she wore. He also cheated on her multiple times, but she always stayed. During the time that this happened, I stopped driving her to see him. One time, she called begging me to drive her over, and I said no. She went on to explain that he was drunk, and if I wouldn't, then he would pick her up, and if they got into a crash due to drunk driving, it would be my fault, so I ended up driving her to his house. I was furious with John at this point for hurting my best friend and had a rebellious teenager give no fucks attitude. So as soon as I walked into his house to drop Sam off, I started screaming at him for being a manipulative piece of shit. His response, and the dark, twisted yet emotionless look in his eyes, still gives me chills to this day. I could break your neck so easily. Thankfully, I was standing right by the front door, so I ran out to my car immediately and sped off. The next couple of years were kind of fuzzy. Also, I asked Sam to stop talking to me about John because I was sick of hearing about him. Basically, they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Sam dated a string of other guys, but would always cheat on them with John. When we were 18, this is when things started getting progressively weirder, and I started to distance myself from Sam because of it. Long story short, Sam had a new boyfriend who she seemed crazy about, and I was relieved because she finally seemed over John. Then, she heard through the grapevine that John was engaged, and she became irate. We were hanging out when she heard the news, and she was like, I just have to go home and process this. She immediately left, and I was like, whatever, I'll give her space. She calls me a few hours later and is talking super fast and laughing a lot. I was like, you good? She was like, yeah. I just broke into John's apartment and smashed all of his shit. I know I have this new guy I'm dating, but I've been hooking up with John still. Don't hate me, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But anyway, I feel great. I broke his TV and cut up his sheets. Too bad John and his fiancée weren't home. I'd never seen her act like this before, and I was so alarmed. What would she have done if they were home? The break-in was never reported to the police because she told John it was her, and if he went to the police, John's fiancée would have likely found out that he was cheating on her with Sam. Now at this point, a smart person would have completely cut her off, but I didn't. I stopped hanging out with her as much, and we naturally grew a bit distant because I had moved across the country for college. But we would text and FaceTime every couple weeks. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, so what about the murder? Hang tight, we're almost there. In 2018, John's fiancée was found dead. The police immediately ruled it a suicide because there was a note, and the gun was found in her hand. All of her friends and family insist that she would never do that. I know this because I have a few mutual friends with his fiancée, and it was understandably that that's all they would talk about. She was known to everyone as being extremely positive and cheerful. They pressured the cops to investigate more, and lo and behold, 1 year later, John was found guilty of murdering her. He's currently in prison, and it chills me to the bone knowing that I was in his house on multiple occasions and used to frequently hang out with him. So now moving on to why I think my friend may have had something to do with it. Last year, she was visiting my city and asked to meet up for dinner. I was like, sure, why not? We're gonna meet in public, and I do miss her, and it would be nice to catch up. While we were at dinner, she had her phone on the table, and I saw a call from the name Jail ringing on her phone. She quickly excused herself to take the call and was gone for a couple minutes. When she got back, I was like, what the fuck? She explained that she visits John in prison regularly, and they talk on the phone almost every day. I was like, why? He was found guilty of murder. Why would you want anything to do with him? She looked me dead in the eyes with a look of pure evil and malice and said, I'm the only one who knows what actually happened. No one else knows the truth. I quickly changed the subject, finished my dinner real quickly, and made an excuse to leave. I was terrified at this point and had no idea what she was capable of. I hightailed it back to my apartment and blocked her on everything and haven't spoken to her since. I know this isn't solid proof that she was involved, but her past behavior, the break-in, coupled with the chilling comment and the fact that she regularly visited a convicted murderer in prison, leads me to believe that she has something to do with it. At the very least, she knows more than she's admitting. Sam, let's never fucking meet again. I had just turned 20 in March of this year and started to get out more on my own. I was always shy. I never wanted to go out alone, but now I started to feel a bit more comfortable. I just ordered myself a pocket knife. I actually have a few now, and would carry it with me most of the time when I went out on daily walks. This one time in June was the one time I was blessed to have thought of bringing my pocket knife with me. It was around 8 p.m. when I decided to go for a walk. Usually I would try to go in the morning or early afternoon, but it had been raining all day, so my walk was delayed. I put on a light hoodie and was about to head out when I realized my knife wasn't in my pocket. I went back up and got it, then was on my way. My usual walk is about 3 to 4 miles. I'm a faster walker, so I could cut the miles to about 2.5 hours max. I would take this side street to the main road that had a walkway about half a mile before it turned into a suburban area. Before you hit the suburban area, there was a path that cut through a forested area that had a few cabins and parks. As I made my way, I had noticed a figure hanging by a tree on the far side of one of the cabins. I took a quick glance at him and continued past him. For your insight, I'm a trans male and 5'1", so I would get mistaken a lot for a small 15-year-old kid. As I made it to the end of the path, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the man was now 15 feet away from me. This dude was pretty tall, at least 6'3". He was well built and was wearing torn jeans and a worn hoodie that seemed a bit too big for him. I began to speed up my walking as I turned the corner and shot a quick glance behind me. He was still behind me, just staring at me as he was making long strides towards me. At this point, I was beginning to freak out. He seemed to get closer with every step, and I quickly took a hold of the knife in my pocket and had my finger on the flipper. The next part is burned into my memory for life. I felt a large hand grab my shoulder and pull me back. I have no clue how I managed to quickly whip around and flick open my knife and swipe towards his face. In just a few seconds, though it felt like minutes, the man in a blink of an eye jerked his face back, bringing up his hands as my knife sliced his palm. He let out a pained yell and fell back a few steps, clutching his hand. It felt like I had just scraped him, but his hand was already bloody and a small pool of blood was starting to form at his feet. He looked at me with anger-filled eyes and then took off the other way. I stood there for a few minutes before realizing what just happened, and I went home as fast as I could to call the police. I answered their questions, and then they took the knife to get a blood sample of this dude. I was shaken from this experience and stayed with my brother for a few nights. A few weeks later, the cops returned and told me that they found the guy and that he was wanted for sexual assault. I was shocked and happy that they found this bastard. My knife was also returned to me a few days later. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't want to help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I would have just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers, named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in occult and anything of that sort. I really never believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in the house, full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started staying with us for long periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped out with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone else in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay, otherwise he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-day shit. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My work shift was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered and handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was the cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for dealing drugs or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before that happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still shocked and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over again and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he had ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known that he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought that we were possessed by demons, and this was his way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't got the call from my boss to come in early, I wouldn't be alive today. So, to the man who brutally murdered my friend and wanted to murder me, let's never meet again. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in an old bungalow type house. It was one story, and we have stairs that immediately goes to the attic. An attic which no one really uses, just puts stuff up there. It's too hot and very stuffy. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had old creaky wooden floors that I remember that I had to polish with the coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents are very traditional. Anyways, my room was near the stairs, leading to the attic. Like, you open my door, then turn right, and the stairs are immediately right there. I hated that, because every time I left my room, I would expect something to immediately crawl down from the attic. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because there's hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m. and weren't expected to come home until 5 a.m. So, me, a 14-year-old girl, would be alone the whole time. I told them I would be safe here. We live in a gated community with tons of guard dogs. Everything will be okay, or so I thought. Before they left, we had already had dinner, so I was stuck cleaning all the dishes. As I was doing that, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking a lot. I didn't really think much of it because the dogs did that from time to time. When I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately locked every door and window and turned off all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were on and it looked normal. My anime posters were on my wall, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my locked, tinted windows. We had tint on them because I was on the first floor and my grandparents wanted to make sure no one would peep in at a young girl's room. They were also barred because my uncle, who used to use this room, always escaped through there to go to parties. This was my grandparents' solution to that. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal until I turned off the lights. As soon as I turned off my lights, a silhouette of a man illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought I was having hallucinations, so I turned on the light and he was gone. I turned it off again and he was back. On, gone, off, gone. I sighed in relief. I was just tricking myself out, I guess. Or something else was casting a shadow. I double-checked the lock on my door just to be safe. One with a doorknob lock, and one of those door latch type locks. I tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep when a lot of dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, it was the neighbors. But as I was finally falling asleep, I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought. I'm tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow. It's just the rats, I said to myself. These rats seemed heavy, and were also pushing furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with a blanket and waited for something. I was also wishing my parents would have given me a phone at a time like this. Suddenly, I heard the doorknob gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push through. This time, I finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't go back to bed. I just sat there by the door, waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I just sat there. I saw something move in the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think was, thank God they're barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I fell asleep, or I was too scared to even think straight. I just remember the next day, my family and I were having breakfast. I casually brought it up to my grandfather. I think I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I've never brought it up again. I don't want to worry them. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far away from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who were near my room were the neighbors. Also, there was nothing outside of my window that could cast a shadow that looked like a man. Lastly, the attic window was open. I've been wanting to share this story for a while, so here it goes. In 2007, when I was 12 years old, my family took a trip to Key Biscayne, Florida, with some of my cousins and family members. Naturally, while at the resort, my cousins and I would all hang out at the kids club, where there were always a bunch of kids to hang out with, epic chicken fingers and ranch dressing, and fun games for us to play. There was this director of the kids club who watched us and facilitated the activities. His name was Dan. In retrospect, Dan was a major fucking creep. He was around 40 years old, super tall and skinny, and was balding badly. The worst part is, sometimes he had us call him Dan, the Animal Man. Side note, these sort of memories leave me in awe of how naive and blinded I was to danger as a kid. If I ever met this guy now, I literally wouldn't want to get within a 5-foot radius of him. And there I was, as a 12-year-old, thinking he rocked. Time is a wonderful thing. Anyhow, I digress. It was made clear to all of us that for unknown reasons, Dan was leaving the hotel in a week. None of this fazed me. One of our last day at the hotel, I lost my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate cell phone. I quickly told my parents that I couldn't find my phone. And considering it was already the second phone I lost that year, my mom yelled at me and told me that if I didn't find it, I would be grounded. I hurriedly ran around the hotel looking for my phone, and along my way I went to the kids club to see if anyone found it. The room that was typically busting with kids was eerily quiet and empty. Dan was sitting on the couch all by himself. "Hey Dan, did you by any chance see my phone?" Dan responded, "Yes, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. Come with me." Thinking absolutely nothing of this, I mindlessly followed behind Dan. as he led me around the back of the hotel. We walked for about 3 minutes and arrived at the foot of a stairwell going into the basement. We were standing at the back of the hotel in a strange area, and there was no one else in sight. "It's down here?" I asked, confused. I was staring down a long flight of stairs, leading into absolute darkness. The walls were made of unpainted concrete, and it looked no more than a storage area, let alone a basement with a lost and found. Dan nodded and held the door open for me, motioning for me to head down the steps. Something in my 12-year-old self suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was instincts, fear, or fucking luck, but I immediately knew I had to get the hell out of there. Before Dan could say anything, I blurted out, "Never mind, I think I left it with my mom," and darted away from the stairwell and back to the hotel lobby. I was so shooken up because something about the situation didn't feel right. I knew he was going to hurt me, and as a kid who wore rose-colored glasses and was overly trusting of others, this really meant something. I tried to compose myself and figured I'd investigate a little bit more. I walked up to the concierge of the hotel and asked him where the lost and found was, because I had lost my phone. The nice woman at the front desk told me that the lost and found was right there, at their desk. She then asked me what kind of phone I lost, and after I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled and pulled it out from the box under her desk. "Someone turned it in earlier," she said, and handed me my phone. "Wait, you're telling me the lost and found isn't in the basement?" I stammered. "No, sweetie, the hotel is under construction, and the basement is being rebuilt. There's no electricity down there, or anything yet." This scared the absolute shit out of me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was dangerous. At the time, I was sharing a hotel room with my cousins, and she was the only person I told. Considering that she was 8 at the time, I think I really freaked her out. Now I'm 26, and I still think back to that moment, and wonder what would have happened if I went down to the basement with Dan, the animal man. It feels truly like one of the most critical junctures of my entire life, and I'm so happy I knew to get the hell out of there before it was too late. I recently contacted the hotel to inquire about the past kid club employee named Dan from 2007, just to see if he was still around, or on a sex offenders list, or in jail. I even told the HR this whole story, but they still refused to give me any information about him, and it sounded pretty sketchy about it. We'll continue to do research, and if I find out any more information, I'll add it to the post. My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so we took her out for a quick drive. The motion usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I would be, and there's poor cell reception inside. He pulled back into the parking lot and waited for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her out of the car seat and sat her on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat down, absent-mindedly rocking her in the carrier, when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached him. It is not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable, toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a nap. But her nap schedule was paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence explaining that she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me, put her down," as panic mounted. She remained calm the entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she approached. He ran full speed ahead and tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. The woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping 911, help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her bag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking their earlier interaction and assumed that he was really a kidnapper. A lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a teeny well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shooken up and insisted that she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for a police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of that baby on my phone," which of course everyone interpreted as him having stalking photos, or worse, pornographic images of the baby. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame this man considering what he thought was going on, hit my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point I was coming out of the store, and I thought I was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized that he didn't have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move our daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed, and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just let him up and leave us alone." One of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him." I was so confused. Why would muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, what do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying, "He tried to abduct this woman's kid." I didn't understand, and was sure I misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he wanted to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would have been at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly, it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, and literally leapt out on my heels. I sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter, and I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could do was think to grab this woman by the hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled with her. Amazingly, none of the bystanders had yet connected that my husband was telling the truth, and that this woman was fleeing with my baby. I yanked her as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. So I screamed. I was so scared and surprised that I actually threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket. I stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child that she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I watched the scene unfold. Within the next couple minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap a baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting the description of her weren't investigative. They were more questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing the blame on my husband. A small sampling. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extract the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them as her own family members? They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby wasn't actually hers. My husband had called his brother at this point, who works in the office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home. We were both shook and cried until we had got our other kids from school. My husband was seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do. He also had 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he would like to press charges, considering the man was generally convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping, and stayed to talk to the police and apologized profusely when the truth became clear. My husband declined to press charges. Amazing and frustrating, there were still people that stuck around to talk to the police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was actually our baby. Alright, so this happened to me last night. I want to share it with you because it's pretty creepy. For some context, I've been working at a bank for about 7 years, and I've always enjoyed the steady income that it has given me. 2 months ago, I was laid off from my job, and having no other form of income, I began to feel very stressed. One night later, as I put my kids to bed, my heart began to race uncontrollably. I thought I was having a heart attack, but as I began to calm down, I realized that I was just experiencing an anxiety attack. I never knew what an anxiety attack was before I experienced it, so it really scared the hell out of me. The next day I decided to go to the doctor to see what I could do to prevent it from happening again. He told me the best things to cope with my anxiety is to walk as often as I can. Walking releases endorphins, which results in happier moods. I took his advice and decided to walk every night at around 7 to 8. Walking was great. I enjoyed the peacefulness of it and began to meet new people in my neighborhood that I never knew existed. I observed the intricate details in all of the old, well-kept houses. Granite pillars that guided the stone walkways, to the carved maple doors or different sized bricks that somehow fit together to create beautiful walls. The more I observed the houses, the more I wondered about one of the houses that stood out from the rest. It didn't look as well kept as the others. I wouldn't say it looked haunted, but it looked like it was vacant. I never saw a TV glow from a window or a light of any kind. There wasn't even a car in the driveway. It was just existing with other houses. I asked people who lived in the general area if they knew of anyone selling it, or if it was being renovated, and no one really had an answer. Last night, as I walked down a sidewalk, I came to the typical street corner that I pass every night when I walk. The corner has an old stone bench, and it faces a vacant house. As I walked, I saw an older woman sitting down on the bench facing the house. When I walked closer to the woman, I noticed the strange attire she was wearing. It was like what you would wear to a funeral. She had on an all-black dress, with a black hat and a black veil covering her face. To make the situation less unnerving, I said hello to her, and in the quietest, raspiest tone, she said, "Hello." It sounded like she smoked a lot. Now you're probably wondering why this bothered me so much. Although her demeanor was quite unsettling, the most unsettling thing about her was that after she said hello to me, she crossed the street and walked inside the house that I thought was vacant. It was like she was waiting for me on that night just to show me that the vacant house isn't vacant. For a little background, I'm a scout. I've been a scout since I was 8 years old, and last year I was leader of my team, so I had to do all the paperwork and calls for finding places to camp. It was mid-November. I had to find a place to camp But since I was lazy, I decided to wait a week before the actual weekend. I decided to call some owners so I could have places to sleep. As I called the numbers, all the owners were unavailable or simply not there. But then I see a number which I never called before, since it was at the end of the list. I call, and the old lady picks up the phone. I do the basic presentation and all. She agrees to let me and the team stay at hers, and we make arrangements. I go to her property to check out everything, such as portable water, the place to put our tent, and the campfire. The place was kind of dark, but it was nice. The week passes, and Saturday arrives. Saturday is ending well, and we did some great games, and ate a lot, and we had a good night show. As I go to sleep in the tent, I stay awake to finish paperwork for the next day. It is now midnight, and I decide to sleep because we have to wake up early to go to church. As I switch off the flashlight, one of my newbie wants to go to the toilet, aka the trees, and asks me to come with her. I can understand because it's better to be accompanied at night, especially in the woods. She does her business, and I suddenly hear some noises far away, but not too far. I tell myself it's nothing. It must be some animals trying to find food. We go back to the tent, and that's when I hear footsteps approaching. As I hear those footsteps, I remain calm and tell myself maybe it's the old lady making sure we didn't put the fire too close to anything. But I still have an odd feeling because it's midnight, and why would she do this at this hour? It goes silent, and I don't hear any footsteps for about 10 minutes. Then I hear more coming to our tents. Thankful all of my girls were sleeping because they would have been scared. As I hear the footsteps, which seem to come from one person, I hear others coming from back of the tent, and I was like, okay, this is getting weird. I need to do something. I check the tent, and thank God, one of my newbies left some embers from the fire, so I could see everything between the fire and the tent. A minute passes by, and a silhouette is just there between the fire and my tent. I stopped breathing. I literally froze. I started to move towards my phone when I saw the silhouette coming closer to the zipper of my tent. I sent a message to one of my bosses, who always camps near the areas, just in case something happens. But I knew she would take too long, so I had to do something, and think fast. That's when I had the idea. I put the alarm on my phone. The silhouette started to unzip the tent, and I actually saw fingers from below. But as the silhouette heard the girls waking up, she or he sprinted back from where they came from. That's when I saw two other silhouettes sprinting back in the same direction. Everything ended well. 20 minutes later, my boss came and stayed the night, and we never had to deal with those silhouettes again, thankfully. Hello, my name is Trent. What happened to me is true. I'm from a cattle and sheep ranch in Montana. I also have 4 saddle horses. The ranch that my cousin and I own is about 4,700 acres, comprising of flat crop and hay fields stretching on both sides of the Yellowstone River. The ranch is located 11 miles northeast of the town of Savage. We run a ranch that's 38 miles upriver from us. That is where this incident occurred. The leased ranch is huge, comprising of over 13,000 acres. The folks that own it are multimillionaires from Oregon who only visit it a few times per year. The ranch has a very rough terrain, and 3 small creeks run through it. In the very northeast corner of it, the land flattens out, and there's an old corral system. There is also a long vacant house nearby in a draw. We had leased the ranch since the mid-2000s and had no trouble until about 5 years ago. It was normal to lose a few cows in the Yellowstone breaks, but we have lost 130 since 2016. Around half of the cattle we were able to locate. The animals that we found were pretty eaten up by coyotes, but a few that we found were not. These carcasses looked a lot like the other cattle mutilations, with the skin around their eyes, the ears, and udder completely missing. It was highly unusual to lose this many cattle, as they were at home throughout the winter, and there are no predators in eastern Montana that could kill a full-grown cow. All of the cattle that were missing were cows, and always between the ages of 3 and 5 years old. This event took place at the end of June last year. We had just trucked the cattle to the ranch 2 weeks prior, and I was checking on them that day. Usually my cousin or his son rode with me, but they were moving the irrigation pivot that day, so I was alone. I parked my pickup next to the corrals and unloaded my horse. This was about 9:30 a.m. My horse's name was Ace. He was a very large horse that weighed a whole ton and stood 19 hands tall. Ace was not very quick or fast. He had great endurance, and you could ride him all day through the roughest country, and he would not tire. It was a pretty usual day until about 1 p.m. when I saw something that didn't belong. About a mile away I could see an animal bounding up a hill. My initial reaction was a deer because it was as big as one, but had proportions more like a mountain lion. I tried to ride closer to whatever it was, but I couldn't find it. It was odd, but not that crazy, so I just put it in the back of my head. The day continued normally until I returned to pick up my trailer. As I went to load Ace, I noticed that the rear axle of my trailer had just come apart. Keep in mind that I had not used it earlier that morning, so there was no reason for that to happen. It was getting pretty late, around 8 p.m., and it took about an hour to get back to the house, so I decided to leave Ace in the trailer there and take the pickup home. The corral fence was alright, but the gate latch had rusted shut to where you could not close it. I had a roll of barbed wire in my pickup, so I used it to secure the gate after I put Ace into it. As I drove home, I noticed a few large lights in the complete opposite direction from the corrals. They resembled combine lights, even though they were further apart and brighter. Also, there would be no reason for a combine to be up there. I arrived home at 10:30 without having any trouble. The next morning my cousin, his son, and I rode up together to fix the axle and get Ace back. When we finally got to the corrals, we saw Ace wasn't there. The wire holding the gate shut had not been meddled with, so there was no logical way he could have escaped. The corral had not been used in decades, so there was grass growing inside. But that day, all the grass was turned up, and you could see where Ace had ran for a while. This was quite unusual, as Ace was always calm and quiet. We looked for him the whole day, but could not find him, but we were severely limited because we were on foot. The next day, me and my cousin's son returned with a fixed trailer and 2 horses to continue the search for Ace. I also brought my dog Daisy. We split up to cover more ground, and every 2 hours we would meet up. Around 3 in the afternoon, while I was riding around the rim of the steep wooded draw, Daisy suddenly scurried down into the draw. I tied the horse I was riding, Penny, to an old cinder tree and followed Daisy down. The sides of the draw were incredibly steep, and I was struggling to make it down there on foot. For a horse as big as Ace, it would be completely impossible. As I got to the bottom, I could smell something dead, and I immediately knew it was Ace. He had not been touched by predators, but was heavily mutilated. He had the same mutilation as the cattle, with the skin around its eyes being gone, as well as the skin around the lips. However, his back legs were completely free of flesh, and was just bone. His ribcage was also opened up, with all of his organs being gone. As I looked around, I could see skeletons of at least 3 cows, and it was obvious that this was some type of dumping ground for whatever did this. I was completely dumbfounded on what had happened. There was no way Ace could have gotten here by himself, so he must have been carefully placed there. I also like to mention that where he was found was a whole 2 miles away from the corrals. Nothing was adding up, and besides, I had just lost my favorite horse. I sadly returned to the spot where me and my cousin's son were going to meet up, and we both rode back to the pickup. After talking to my cousin, we decided not to renew our lease. Our current lease will expire in 2022. My cousin's son spends a lot of time on the internet and thought it sounded very similar to what happened at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. For the past month, I've been studying what happened, but have been unable to come up with a definitive answer. When I was in high school, this guy fell in love with me, and his friend gave him my Snapchat. I knew who he was. I had spoken to him like twice, so I added him back, not thinking much of it. At the time, SnapMap was new, and I didn't know there was a ghost mode, or whatever it's called, so no one could see your location. We started talking and quickly became friends. I had no idea that he had feelings for me until he asked me out on a date. I nicely declined, making excuses for why I couldn't go, and that's when things started to get creepy. He Googled my street and literally counted how many houses there were before mine so he could find it. Then he sent a picture of my house and said, "Isn't this your house?" I said it wasn't because I was so fucking creeped out, but he continued saying he knew it was. At that time, the idea of him using SnapMap didn't even cross my mind since I was panicking so much. A few days later, I had to go to the drugstore with my mom to get her medicine. I had stopped talking to him, but before I left, he texted me something. I had left him on red since my mom told me to hurry and started walking towards the drugstore. The drugstore was about 20 minutes away from my house. There was a guy I used to like working at the drugstore, so me and my mom were gushing about him, looking at me and smiling. I was 15 years old. When I came back home, I had internet. I didn't have data, so obviously my messages came up. One of them was from him. I opened it and he asked, "Where were you 20 minutes ago?" I answered, nowhere?" He said, "You were at the pharmacy. The worker is cute, isn't he? You have a crush on him." I was so scared and finally realized it was because Snap Maps, so I deactivated it. That was the start of him abusing, stalking, and sexually assaulting me for the next year. Regardless, now that I think about it and understand Snap Maps a lot more, if you don't have data, your position doesn't update. So how did he know where I was? And how did he know I had a crush on that worker? It still creeps me out to this day, but I'd like to believe it's just a coincidence. Okay, so this happened about 4 years ago, when I was 16. I was super vain and worried about my appearance. I always wanted to look pretty, so I would go all out when I went out or took pictures. Curled hair, fake lashes, the whole 9 yards. But I've since had kids and have a man that tells me I look beautiful when I look like a hobo and never bother with makeup or anything anymore. Anyways, I had my Snapchat account set to public so anyone could watch my stories or snap me. I always figured if someone is weird or whatever, I can just block them. Yeah, right. Well, one day, I'm out to lunch with my mom when a random dude messages me. He says I'm pretty and all this and that, but being super nice, but I didn't really care to talk to him, so I was just giving him one-word replies, hoping that he would get the hint, because I hated being rude. Then he asked me if I could send him nudes. Absolutely not, and I tell him so. Well, he didn't like that. He told me that I was a whore, and he hated women because they're all a bunch of sluts, and I'm just mad because no one likes me. Okay. I told him that he was a psycho, and laughed at him, and he threatened to sue me for defamation. So I thought that was the end of that. Well, it wasn't. I block dude and go about my day when someone adds me on Snapchat. I look at the user info, and their snap score was a 0, and their username was something really weird. They didn't snap me or anything, but continued to watch my stories every single day. Fast forward a few months, and this person snaps me. I was doing the same one-word replies, cause I really didn't feel like talking. You'd think I would learn from the first time, but nope. He starts with nice small talk, then out of nowhere sends me a couple of different selfies of myself that were posted on my stories months ago. He asks me if I can print them out for him, gives me the size he wants them in, and says he'll give me his address. Hold up, what? I immediately shut it down. Then, this dude sends me a couple pictures of myself, framed in his house, on his wall. Fuck no. I told him off real good and blocked him. Then another account adds me. Another weird username. I remove it and change my account settings. He still has my username, so he adds me from a million different accounts, which I won't add back. They were all super weird usernames. I won't give the actual usernames, But on Snapchat, you can choose different display names, and they were all pretty similar to his usernames. One was, I'm wet. Another was, just add me back. Snapchat also tells you how the person added you, via phone number, user search, quick add, etc. They all said user search, so I know he searched it up, and every account had a snap score of 0, so obviously he had just made the account, and I knew it was him. Weird fucker who keeps adding me on Snapchat years later because I won't send him nudes. Let's not meet. This happened in Arizona about 7 years ago while on our biannual fishing trip to the Black River out in the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Each year we would take a little dirt road, only accessible via 4x4 vehicles, all the way until it ended. The only people we ever saw out there were cattle ranchers that never really went past the tree line, which was about a half-hour drive from where we camped. Needless to say, we were always way out in the boonies. There was one way in and one way out, and we camped at the very end of the road. This trip in specific was our 5th year going out to the same spot. Twice a year, and this would be about our 11th week-long trip at that spot. Never saw another soul outside of our party of 5 all 10 other times. We get up super early, sometimes a little bit before the sun. We get everything ready to fish all day, wanting to get as much fishing in as possible before it got dark. This experience happened on the 3rd day of 8. We were up eating some breakfast, instant oatmeal packets, and protein bars for those who care, and we were getting our gear ready for the day. This was when the sun wasn't quite up yet. We still had lanterns and headlamps on to see. With all of us right there, we hear footsteps coming from the road. We all look up and see 2 middle-aged Native American men walking down the road. No gear with them, both looking straight forward, not even acknowledging our existence. They walked straight past us up a trail along the river. We were spooked because we'd never seen anyone there in the many times we had been. We figured that they may have been camping up a bit further down the road. We went down the same path a bit later, and about an hour in, we hear rustling from the other side of the river. Then we see a fawn burst out of the trees and start running downstream. A few seconds later, 2 very mangly coyotes come sprinting out of the same spot, chasing the deer. They eventually cross back into the woods and disappear from view. Over the next 5 days, we never saw those 2 guys again. If they had gear, I wouldn't be suspicious of this. However, to avoid us on the way back, they would have had to go extremely out of their way to get back to the road, and it wouldn't be feasible. On top of that, the coyotes did chase the fawn back downstream where the road was. I used to have my profile set on private to avoid creepy encounters like this. I put it back on public after a while because of a rally I attended and wanted to put my name out there. One day, I received a text message to my number. He claimed to be a man that saw me on Instagram and thought I was beautiful and wanted to get to know me more. At first, I thought it was just some sick joke one of my friends was pulling on me. But quickly I realized it most likely wasn't because the older man followed me shortly before that text. I didn't see it before the text because I didn't have my notifications on for Instagram. I was skeptical and asked him how he got my number in the first place, and I thought it was really weird. He claimed he got it off of Instagram, off of my email somehow. But I checked my email and my signature didn't have my contact information. But that wasn't the only flaw in his claim. I didn't have any of my personal information displayed on my Instagram, in no way, shape, or form. He proceeds to keep texting me, introducing himself really specifically as if we were texting on a dating app, saying he was a woman's doctor or whatnot. As creeped out as I was, I didn't want to be rude and tick him off, so I politely asked him to not contact me because I wasn't interested in being friends or getting to know a man in his 50s that gave me a flimsy idea of how he got my contact information. The conversation went on with him carrying a lot of it and me repeatedly declining his weird and extremely creepy offer. He continued to glorify my ethnicity, culture, and looks, attempting to try to connect with me on some way or another. Eventually, I got really tired of it and started to tell him that I would call the cops and report his number if he didn't stop texting me. He passive-aggressively threatened me, telling me, "You're gonna regret that," bouncing back and forth between that and being passive, saying, "I'm just trying to get to know you better. Please give me a chance. I get lonely. I may be old by age, but everyone says I have the heart of a 19-year-old. I eventually stopped answering, and at this point had already gotten some advice from my friends to block the guy on everything. Hope he was only bluffing in his aggressive threats and that he was just a desperate old man. From then on, I usually take an extra look around me before entering my car, going out, being more careful on social media and whatnot. It was mostly just terrifying how stubborn, unwilling, and aggressive he was towards me, telling him no and that I'm not interested, and how I still don't even have a solid way of knowing how he obtained any of my information. This happened about 6 years ago. I was single and on Bumble. I met Zach, and after talking a bit, agreed to meet. We went to dinner and got on well. He had brought flowers and arranged for the waiters to put them at the table, which I thought was unexpected but nice. He had been to a good school, had a good job, and was polite and funny. He basically checked every box on paper. He told me stories about his friends and family. All seemed totally normal. We went out for drinks after dinner and went home. The next morning I get a text from him. "I had a great time. Let's do it again." Although there was nothing wrong with him, I just didn't feel a spark, so I said, "Thank you so much for the great night," and explained it wasn't really what I was looking for, but had a nice time meeting him. I expected that to be it, or for him to say no worries, but I got another text. What was wrong? Least you can do is give me another chance. He offered drinks nearby. I didn't answer. That's where things took a turn. Zach started sending me extremely long messages. "How dare you do this? We had something really special. I've talked to all my friends, and they said it sounded like it was something special too." He would get angry. "You're selfish and heartless. How can you hurt me like this? The least you can do is answer me." And would then apologize. "I'm so sorry. I'm a good guy. I just feel so strongly about this because I never felt this way before, and I know that this is true love. I need to know why you don't see it too. Please tell me what went wrong. Let me give you the chance to see what I could see." It went on and on. Essay-length messages about how he felt about me and what we could be together. This continued all day every day for about a week, 20 plus long messages a day, and he would constantly call me. By the weekend, I was getting calls almost every 10 minutes. My doorbell had also started ringing constantly. When I would check the door camera, whoever it was crouching down so I couldn't see them. That day, I blocked his number. I didn't get any more surprise visits and moved shortly after. In the following years, I met someone and we had a son together. Life went on. In the last week, I checked my LinkedIn and Instagram. I had 2 new requests, both from Zach. Although you seemingly still want to, Zach, let's not meet again. Never have ever thought that I would have to worry about someone stalking me. This is from a couple years back, so it's hard to get every detail. I'm sorry if it's not perfect. From a young age, I've always been told about stranger danger and such. I actually had Facebook at a really young age because my parents knew I was aware. I only really got it so I could play this game called Yoville. Anyways, I started an Instagram and grew a significant amount of followers. It's kind of scary not knowing who follows you, but I modeled and it never crossed my mind that someone was watching. It all started when I was going on a trip and received a Snapchat from a username Hot Daddy. Okay, nothing to it, right? Sent a picture of his private parts. Weird, but it's nothing new to many girls. I didn't reply and went on with my day. I wasn't paying too much attention to my phone because I was at the zoo, so every now and then I would take a look on my phone and reply to my friends and such. I looked at another message and noticed Hot Daddy again text me saying, "You opened my snap. I wouldn't ever think you would reply. Do you still live on insert address?" Obviously I was shocked. I wasn't going to say I moved, so I said, yes I did. He explained that he had seen my Instagram photos and me being around town. He named the street that was right by me, so I know he must have lived somewhere down there. He then replied, "I've been seeing you for years and was so nervous to talk to you." I was a little confused, thinking it was a joke from one of my friends. I mean, who would actually stalk? He just said a bunch of weird things that I couldn't wrap my mind around. I asked if he was stalking me or something. This wasn't a friend that I knew, but a part of me wished it was. I was always skeptical of the old house after my dad passed away. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, and a lot of scary things happened when I lived there. It was only my mom, my 15-year-old brother, and 17-year-old me. Hot Daddy replies, "I've only seen you walking around. I've never stalked you, but I can if you want me to." He also insisted of picking me up and taking me to McDonald's. Mind you, he still thinks I live there. I wanted to make sure it wasn't one of my friends playing a joke on me, so I asked him to send me a picture. It was a man. I blocked him. I don't know if it was a joke, but one of my friends actually lives on that road, and she opened the door one day to a white man, asking to mow her lawn. He exclaimed her, and pushed open the door a little bit, until she replied no. He got her on Snap as well, so I knew he knew what she looked like. He was an easy target to spot, because the majority of the people who lived down that road were not white. He also was a construction worker, so it was easy spotting. This was 2 years back, so Hot Daddy, or whoever the hell you are, I hope we never meet. I was on a hitchhiking adventure from BC, Canada, to Antigua, Guatemala, which started in September 2019. This post is taken from notes in my journal, which I also wrote as soon as I could after this insane experience. If you've ever hitchhiked before, you know how amazing it is and how many cool people you can meet. Out of 1,000 of rides across 40 countries, I've only had 2 bad or dangerous encounters thumbing it. This was my second one. I was taking a break from traveling to find weed trim work in California's Nevada City, a beautiful little town with a very interesting crowd, but got stuck a few towns over for not getting a ride all day. I ended up sleeping a night at the Love's gas station, which I've done plenty of times before. I've slept in worse places, at least Love's has a bathroom. In the morning, I was a little more desperate to accept rides, because no one was stopping and it had already been a whole day. I just wanted to get out of there. A pickup was speeding past me and slams on its brakes, then slowly backs up. Inside, a man and a woman in their late 50s, and he says in a husky voice, "Where you headed, boy?" "Nevada City. Any distance helps." "Well, get in. We're going to Yuba." They seemed normal enough, even without most of their teeth and hair, so I jumped in. It all happened in rapid succession. 1. I toss my bag in the back and jump in. 2. I shut the door. 3. I notice a pile of guns and bullets on the floor. 4. Before I have time to rethink my decision, we speed off. So I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm in danger. And they start telling me how this guy just got out of jail for aggravated assault and how he beat that motherfucker so bad he can't think straight no more. And they both laugh. She was holding her seatbelt over her chest. They both smelled like shit, and they started asking how much money I have. I think, yep, I'm not safe here. After hitchhiking all this way, I don't look particularly wealthy. I'm filthy. I need a shower. I look no different than the stereotypical homeless guy. So I try to seem more poor than I am. I'm broke as fuck, man. That's why I'm trying to go to the city. I'm hoping to make some cash trimming. The man looks me in the eye. "Well, you'll find it alright. You'll find it good. Don't be afraid to do no dirty work. If people try, and they'll try to fuck you, you fuck them first. You get what I'm saying? Put your eyes on the damn road, Jesus Christ!" The woman points forward and he swerves back into the right lane. He asked me if I smoke, and knowing that California has legalized weed, I put 2 and 2 together. He's offering me a joint, so I say, "Yeah, I smoke." With a wild look in his eyes, he exclaims, Great. And we turn off the highway and start down a dirt road. I'm more than worried, and I look behind us. In the back of the truck is my bag, a chainsaw, pickaxe, and a plastic tarp over something. Didn't help my anxiety. Finally, we stop from the front of the clearing. The woman takes out, not a joint, but a meth pipe. It's the first time I've ever seen a meth pipe, and a lot of things start to make sense. When he lights up and exhales into the car, I've never seen smoke so white. I roll down my window as fast as possible, cause I don't want to smoke that shit. The woman takes some as well, and they try to tell me how they were gonna collect money that a woman owed them. That damn bitch is gonna pay today, one way or another. Damn straight. She better have that money. I'm gonna grab her and say, "Where's my money, bitch?" Oh, she'll have it alright. She'll have it or else. Say, son, you ever steal something? Cause we could make $20,000 today. I don't know exactly how to answer this guy, and he repeats, $20,000 today. Here, smoke some of this, and hands me the pipe. Nothing like meth, ain't that right? I gently reject it and say that meth's not really my thing, which he surprisingly takes well and smokes some more before he puts it away and drives back towards the highway. His driving is terrible, swerving, speeding, hitting the brakes abruptly, and starts trying to convince me to help him steal marijuana plants. You'll hold the gun, and I'll drill the hole, and I'll keep a lookout. Yeah, baby girl will keep a look. Now you gotta be careful if you hear any dogs, because them bitches are nasty. Nasty. See this bite? And he reveals what looks like a terrible scar on his arm. I didn't really know how to get out of this situation, so I sounded as confident as possible and said that I was meeting a friend to look for work together, and they will be expecting me today. We neared the end of Yuba City, and they pulled over to the side. Well, it's your funeral. You don't want to eat? Fine by me, but if you ever want the cash, you call me. He hands me a number. Hell no, I think. Thanks, I will. Quickly retrieving my bag, smiling nervously. The woman says with a wave, "Take care, God bless," and they speed off. I'm standing on the other side of the road thinking, what the hell was that? Just happy to be out of that car. Meth heads 1 and 2, thanks for the offer to steal marijuana plants, but let's never, ever meet again. Not too scary, and nothing bad happened, but I think it could have. This was last June, just before I turned 18. Me and my friends went on a surfing holiday to the English town of Cornwall. We decided to go to a place called the Eden Project, which was a massive indoor rainforest, but it was quite far away. We got a bus, which dropped us off 5 miles away, and planned to walk the rest. We ended up getting lost, and to make matters worse, it started pouring like heavy rain, and we were stuck in the middle of the English countryside. We decided to see if anyone on the road would give us a lift, so we did the usual stick your thumb out hitchhiker thing. A few cars went by until a truck stopped. It was 2 very big grown men that looked a good few years older than us. We felt a little uneasy when we saw them, since we were 4 young looking girls, but I went to their window to talk to them anyway. The guys looked me up and down in a very creepy way, and I asked if they were going to the Eden Project. They said that they were going wherever we were, and that we should get in their truck. At this point, I was slightly freaked out and noticed the open beer cans sitting in their cup holders. I politely said no thank you, and that they should carry on, and we would find another car. Driver hesitated and looked me up and down again before speeding off. I was a little freaked out after that, but we ended up getting a lift off some nice elderly Americans in a minivan, so it turned out alright in the end. I'm glad none of us got in the truck with them though. Hi there. I'm usually a reader, like a lifetime reader on Let's Not Meet, but I'm a first time poster. Anyway, here's something that happened to me recently. I had gotten a notification saying that someone had added me on Snapchat. I checked how they had added me, and it said they added me by user. I added them back and they immediately text me just a simple hi and how are you doing? Sweet, right? Now in my mind, I knew that this could go two ways. I would reply and have an actual nice conversation with them, or they could just ignore what I said and send me unwanted pictures. Well, I got lucky, or so I thought. It went the first way, and they were really nice until they lied. I asked them how they found my account, and his response was, I randomly added you. I then asked how old he was. He responded with 25. I'm a female that is only 15. Please keep that in mind. I tell him that I shouldn't start texting him, and he said he understood and called me love. Red flags. Hours later, he started texting me again, asking me if it was possible to get to know each other and go on a date. I said no because I'm underage. He didn't take no for an answer and comes at me with, but I want to spoil someone. I'm the manager at this company that I've been working at for 4 years, blah blah blah. And like I said, I'm a long-time reader, so automatically I was like, hell no, I know how this shit goes. He then proceeds to tell me about himself, and to my shock, he lives in my city. I turn off my location and everything. He starts asking me, and I ignore his questions and ask him what he looks like. He tries to play the reverse Uno card on me, and I play it back, earning his username instead of his name he had before. He had blocked me. So dear Mateo, let's not meet ever again, whether it's on social media or real life. And yes, I still don't want to go on a date with you. This happened on the same hitchhiking journey I mentioned in one of my previous stories. It was dark out and pretty late. A trucker pulled up. We discussed beforehand that we would take turns sleeping so that we wouldn't be caught off guard by anything. This trucker seemed a bit off emotionally. He shared how his wife had died. He never shared how, and we never asked. I was uncomfortable with the topic. He had the same song playing on a constant loop throughout the entire drive. I wondered if the song reminded him of his wife, and I'm sure it must have, as it was a love song. Funny how one of my other creepy hitchhiking experiences involved a man with an entire tape on continuous loop. Go figure. So I was pretty tired and went to rest in the back while my friend stayed awake and kept conversation with the trucker. I must have not been sleeping for terribly long when I awoke to my friend's voice yelling at me to get up and that we were getting out. I had a sense that if I hadn't gotten up and out quickly, I wasn't going to be getting out. I hurried and hopped up into the pouring rain right on the freeway. He left us there and sped off. Apparently, she had dozed off and awoke to his hand up her dress. I have no idea whether the man would have harmed us, and I'm sure the story would have gotten a whole lot creepier. Either way, thank God we made it out of there in one piece. I was on Snapchat for like 20 seconds when all of my friends have already reposted some weird messages saying a senior had threatened to shoot up the school. The message by the guy said, mothers will mourn, siblings will cry, fathers will remember. I'm gonna kill someone this week. God help me. Then there was this video of him shooting an AR-15. I was creeped the fuck out. I started calling my mom and dad, crying and begging them not to take me to school tomorrow. Luckily they said they heard, and me and my big sister didn't go to school. Even luckier, the 3 kids were arrested for the plot of that threat, and nothing happened that day. I don't know what happened to the guy who said it, but all I know is, soon he'll get the help that he needs. This is a continuation of a story I posted on, entitled Parents. Here's a quick summary. On 2 previous occasions, I had picked up a lady that was hitchhiking with her kids. The lady was a con artist, and not a very good one, and had trained her kids to be a part of her con with scripted dialogue. This story happened about 2 years ago, after I had forced her to get out of my car outside of a police station. On the day in question, I was driving alone. I was nearing a traffic circle in my hometown when 2 young ladies jumped in front of my car, forcing me to stop. The two young ladies claimed that some guy was chasing them and they needed to get away from there. I live in South Africa, a country known best for its crime. This also happened around the time that my hometown had a serial rapist going around targeting young women, and I just happened to be in the same area that the last attack had occurred. Overall, I didn't think twice about unlocking the car and letting them in. The two girls looked around the same age, with one being very slim and the other leaning more towards the larger variety. The skinny one got in the front seat and the bigger one in the back. The one in the front was called Jen, and the one in the back, Kira. I asked them if I should drive them to the police station, but they said no, and asked me to drive them into town. Apparently, their boyfriends would meet them there. Jen hasn't said a word since getting in. I was driving in the town's direction when the following dialogue occurred between them. Like in my previous post, all the dialogue has been translated from Afrikaans. Jen: Friend, I don't want to sleep on the street tonight. Kira: I know, but don't worry. God will provide us a miracle. Jen: But where will that miracle come from? Kira: Maybe he already sent it. This would have sounded like an obvious ploy. They'd ignore it and simply try to get the girls out of their car. To me though, this meant something more. You see, the moment that Jen had spoken for the first time, alarm bells started going off in my head. I had heard this dialogue before. Not more or less the same dialogue. The exact same dialogue. It was then that I had recognized her. She was the daughter of a female hitchhiker I picked up a few years prior, and those were the same exact words that had been spoken between her and her mother. I never mentioned the mother's name in my previous post, but she had introduced herself as Nastasha. I continued driving, but cut their conversation short. So, how's Nastasha? Kira, obviously taken aback by my question. Who's Nastasha? You know, Jen's mother, Nastasha. Jen was completely silent again. Kira said, No, she's not Jen's mother. Really, that's interesting. And you don't know her at all? Kira, no, yes. We do know her, but we don't know her. Jen started sobbing. Won't you please help us? We're hungry, and we can't afford food. I looked at Kira and wanted to make a snarky remark, but decided that was beneath me. Kira had now started up too, and was also trying to fake cry. Jen was a much better actress. Some dialogue ensued, with them asking for money, and me refusing. I don't remember the exact line exchange. Eventually, I softened up and took them to McDonald's drive-thru. They both ordered the most expensive meals they could see on the menu, and I paid in cash. Stupid mistake. As we were waiting in the drive-thru, again, this is South Africa, so this usually does take a while. Kira asked if she could borrow my phone and send a text to her boyfriend to say that they'll be there soon. I sighed but handed her my phone. The food eventually came and we continued driving. I was getting pretty uncomfortable and wanted them to get out of my car. Then they started asking me for money again, and more of the same dialogue ensued. Next thing I knew, Kira started to seductively massage my shoulders from behind. Her voice had softened, and she was talking in a seductive tone. I pulled the car to an abrupt stop and told her, still polite but firmly, please get your hands off me. Kira didn't listen and started moving her hands down lower. I repeated. I said, I was cut off by Jenna saying, listen to him, Kira. He said no. Kira obliged and took her hands off me and gave me my phone back. Why do you still have it? Kira protested for a moment, but then handed it back quickly. I looked around for my wallet. It was no longer where I had put it. Where's my wallet? We don't have your wallet. I put it right next to me. It's no longer there. Where is it? We didn't steal your wallet. I'm gonna count to 10. And then what? You're gonna take it from us? Two young girls alone in the car with you after we were almost just assaulted? Who's gonna believe you over us? I was silent for a few seconds, considering my options. Strangely enough, they were right. The scales were not tipped in my favor here. I told them to just get out of my car. Kira protested, but Jen quickly obliged and made Kira follow. I sped off as quickly as I could, livid. I got home, still blazing, and took a while to cool off. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I took out my cell phone. Going into my sent items, the following text is what she had sent. Sent item number 1. We have one. We're bringing him to you now. Sent item 2. Almost there. Whatever the sender had replied, she had been smart enough to delete it, but obviously forgot about the sent items. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd driven them all the way to where they asked to be dropped off, and I don't really know. Oh, and I eventually found my wallet under my car seat. All of the cash was gone, of course. This isn't scary per se, but it's always creepy when someone that you've known forever and thought of like a mentor is revealed to be something much, much different. So, I had this boss, who I'll call Mike, and he had to come in to fill in for a few months while my regular boss was on maternity leave. He was pretty amazing. He inspired me to work harder and even ended up promoting me. The two of us and a third employee that I'll call James were always working shifts together. It was fun, just laughing and kicking ass because we all had a similar sense of humor, and James and I were definitely the best employees there. After Mike's time to fill was over, James and I were super bummed because he seriously was the best manager. He was fair and rewarded hard work and truly cared about his employees' satisfaction. He just made everything fun, even though we were working harder. We both looked up to Mike as a manager and a human being. We had the utmost respect for him and vowed to keep in touch when we parted ways. Well, fast forward a year or so, James and I ended up dating. We kept in touch with Mike, and he was so happy we ended up together because he thought we were both great people who deserved each other. We saw Mike a few more times and kept in touch over the years through social media. When James proposed and we started planning our wedding, we knew we wanted Mike to be in it. He was part of the trio before James and I even knew we would be together, and the three of us had a bond. We asked him to read something during our ceremony, and he accepted, expressing how honored he felt. Well, when it got to the day of the wedding, Mike was nowhere to be seen. We kept calling him as the ceremony was quickly approaching, and finally James got a hold of him. Mike told him that he couldn't get out of work and wouldn't be able to make it. We were both taken aback a little, because the Mike we knew and looked up to would never bail like this and never even let us know. We figured that there had to be a reasonable explanation and were very disappointed, but the wedding had to go on. We had James' niece do the reading even though Mike's name was printed on the program. Well, fast forward again, a few more years. We had only spoken to Mike a handful of times since the wedding, but he had also taken the time to write a beautiful, lengthy recommendation letter in that time period. There were no hard feelings about the wedding, and James and I still shared the highest opinions of our friend. Then Mike kind of disappeared off of social media, and the next time we tried calling him, his phone number had changed. James and I exchanged sentiments of concern and hoped he was doing okay, but it didn't go much past that. One day, James got a random call from a number that wasn't on his contact list. He answered it, and it turned out to be Mike. So he put it on a speakerphone so I could say hello too. We had our brief pleasantries, but then Mike got into the reason for his call. He wanted to know if he could stay with us for a day or two. My reaction was, of course, but James shot me a sharp look, so I added, well, let us discuss, and we'll call you back. Before concluding the call, James inquired about what was going on. Mike said that he was living with his father to take care of him because he was terminally ill, but that he couldn't stay there another night because he checked the camera footage in their home and saw his dad on tape standing over him with a knife while he slept. When the call ended, James said he thought something was off. I didn't get why he'd instantly be that suspicious. I mean, the story was insane and all, but it was Mike. James said something like, we haven't heard from him in forever, and now he's calling us for a favor? He lives 2 hours away, and we're the ones he calls? Why wouldn't he just seek help from someone closer? He has family in the area too. I agreed that it was odd, and it definitely conjured up a lot of questions, including why were there even cameras inside the house? But still, I didn't like the idea of leaving Mike hanging if he was truly out of options. I told James we should call back and probe a little more. When we called back, James asked if it would be easier for someone closer to help him out, and asked about family in the area. Mike gave a vague explanation on why everyone in his life turned against him. Then with the most mopey, disappointed voice, he said it was okay if we couldn't help him, that he understood what was going on and wouldn't bother us anymore. James and I both looked at each other and said we'd call him right back. We quickly discussed that this was all very strange, but that he would have to be pretty desperate to contact us for help. We acknowledged that his little bit about understanding if we were unable to help was meant to manipulate us, and we felt conflicted about everything, but ultimately decided a few days couldn't hurt. We called him back and told him that he could come, and figured we'd give him the address and that would be that. He then said he no longer had a vehicle and would need to be picked up. We asked about him catching an Uber, and he said he had no money that he could access at that moment, which we didn't pry him on. It was getting a little late, and it was a long drive to his location, so we asked if there was anywhere he could stay for the night, and we could make the trip in the morning. He said he would just sleep on a park bench or something, which again, we knew was meant to manipulate us, but we didn't cave on this one. We asked where we should pick him up the following day, and he gave us his dad's address. Immediately after we got off the phone, we were like, what the fuck has been going on with Mike that has ostracized him from his family and friends and caused him to lose his car? He had been making 4 times our salary when we first met him. He had a brand new car, and now he didn't have enough money for an Uber? We went and picked him up the next day, and I got out and ran up to him and gave him a hug. He seemed oddly unresponsive to my affection, so I just shrugged him off and showed him to the front passenger seat where I'd been sitting. He was super tall, so I let him sit up there, and I hopped in the back. When we got to our house, we showed him the guest room, and he put his things down and immediately asked if we could take him to the grocery store. James said he was done driving for the day, so I said I would take him, but commented that I thought that he didn't have money on him. He told me that he had food stamps, which there was no way he would be qualified for with his old job, so I knew something was up, but I wasn't going to dig into the personal details of his finances. So I logged it in my mind and kept my mouth shut. You might be thinking, it just sounds like someone fell on hard times, and that's basically Mike's story as well. But it was just very vague in important areas, and full of story after story of people that were determined to destroy him for no known reason whatsoever. 1 or 2 bad eggs is believable, but no one is the innocent victim in every scenario. He was telling us that he had no idea why his life has fallen apart and why those close to him seemed to turn on him out of nowhere, or why so many people were out to get him without seeming to have any motivation. 2 nights turned into a week, and finally James asked what Mike's plan was. Mike acted hurt and said that he would be gone in the morning. We told him that he didn't need to leave immediately, but we would like to have some kind of idea of his plans for going forward. That night in bed, James and I discussed it and decided we would tell Mike he could stay as long as he needed if he wanted to help around the house and keep his room relatively clean because it contained several antique items of James' mother. We were also going to ask him to help me with some entrepreneurial decisions, as Mike had claimed to be a totally self-made, successful entrepreneur before this. Streak of bad luck, series of fortunate events, and had recently been laid off. We presented our offer the next day, and Mike excitedly accepted. We thought it was going to be a rewarding trade-off for both parties. Now, this story isn't about my marriage, and I'm not going to go too far into the wealth of problems James and I had, but a little info will be necessary. James was always highly critical of me, and often talked down to me. He seemed to have nothing but negative opinions. I wasn't perfect, but I wanted to be loved and worked my ass off for James' approval. I was continually trying to make him happy, but no matter what I did, I would fail in his eyes. After a few weeks, Mike clearly started to see some cracks in our marriage, despite the fact that James toned it down in Mike's presence. Trying to be a good wife, I acted like all was fine in front of Mike, and never mentioned any dissatisfaction in my marriage. Mike and I started to spend a lot of time alone in our entrepreneurial pursuits. He was supposed to be teaching me the tricks of the trade within several avenues of making money, but we kept coming out with little success. He had excuses and explanations for why his wisdom didn't seem to be progressing us forward at all, but he was someone I greatly looked up to as a professional and a friend, and believed that it would all pay off soon, like he said. After living together for weeks, enough talking among all of us had been done to start noticing weird contradictions to many of the things Mike had told us, but he always worded things in a way that left a slight amount of room for doubt. If you were to question any of it, there was never a way to straight up catch him in a lie. Mike also wasn't fulfilling his end of the deal at home, and kept saying he'd take his turn to do the dishes and such, but probably only did it once or twice, and he completely trashed the guest room. Not only was there garbage everywhere, but he left food and drinks, and they would be lost in the sea of clothes and trash, and we could smell things rotting. There's a melted tub of ice sitting on his bedside table for weeks. I didn't care as much as James did, and suggested we remove his mom's things from the room, but I did agree that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, things were getting more and more icy with James and I, and one day when I was out with Mike on a job, I broke down in tears about how much I was hurting and about how James treated me. Mike offered words of comfort and reluctantly admitted that he picked up on how mean James could be, and said he was very sorry and that I didn't deserve it. Mike having been possibly the only witness I have ever had to what I had been going through in my marriage, this was amazingly validating. Mike agreed that it was incredibly unjustified, but made me a promise not to tell James that I said anything, because he didn't want to appear like he was taking sides. The next day, Mike had once again volunteered to take turns doing the dishes, so I didn't do them. I hate doing dishes, and happily left them for Mike when he assured me that he would handle it. Well, Mike got a call informing him that his dad didn't have long to live, so he wanted to see him. James didn't seem at all interested in helping, so I volunteered to take him and stay for moral support, and we headed out. Mike started telling me that his dad had dementia and makes up weird things, so he's advised not to take anything to heart. He cited a few examples of things he'd previously said, and they were more like accusations. One of them being that Mike had stolen all the money in his savings, but really couldn't reconcile the vast difference between the Mike I met 8 years ago before and someone that would rob his dying father. While visiting his dad, I didn't say much, and I didn't want to insert myself into a private family moment, but I kept noticing things that were weird. Like his dad was fully conscious and talkative, and he didn't seem like a dying man at all. He even asked us to get him Burger King in the middle of it all. I kept trying to justify things in my head, like who am I to say a dying man can't want a final meal at Burger King? A few hours later, James called, irate that I had left without doing the dishes that Mike had promised to do. He chewed me out and threatened a divorce, which is always his go-to to try to whip me into shape, and having recent affirmation from Mike that I wasn't the only one that saw James' emotional abuse, I said, "Fine, divorce won't be thrown in my face anymore, so divorce it is." Back in Mike's dad's room, his dad was yelling about the money and such, and Mike looked at me in a way to signal the dementia was talking. I started to really question what happened with his dad and if he was really even dying, but it wasn't something I could just really handle investigating at the moment, given that I had just separated from my husband. When we left the hospital, Mike's dad was still alive and eating candy bars. I had nowhere else to go, so I went back home and slept upstairs on the couch. I didn't speak to James for 2 whole days, and then Mike said that he had talked to his mom and I could stay there for a week. I wondered why his mom wasn't the one helping him if they were in contact and on good terms, but I just accepted the offer. I couldn't take being in that house anymore. Mike said that he was going to go with me and stay there too, which I thought looked really bad, but he said he spoke with James and that he understood and was fine with it. I spent an entire week crying and talking to Mike about how I felt, and he even woke up in the middle of the night with me and if I woke up and started spiraling downhill. He made no advances on me or anything of the sort. After the week, I wanted to stay with my parents, and Mike went back to stay with James. I eventually saw them both when I came over to get some things, and in talking with James, he was very much ready for Mike to leave. They barely seemed to talk, and didn't seem on good terms whatsoever. One night, I got the weirdest impulse to ask James if Mike ever said anything about me that he made a promise not to tell me. James hesitated for a second, but said yes. Through a series of questions, we inched through both of our experiences with Mike. He had been playing into our rapid declining marriage and using everything he observed against us. He had been going out and teaching me things about money, and he did the same thing he did as my boss those years before. Told me my strengths and complimented my ability to catch on to things quickly. We didn't have much success, but it was very obvious not on account of me. However, he was going back and feeding James terrible opinions of me, claiming we weren't making any money because I was so dense and hard to teach. Mike would also comment on the very same thing he told me that were unacceptable that James did, except he would tell James he doesn't know how he would live with someone like me, and that he would go insane. He was carefully and strategically forcing our marriage to fall apart by exacerbating our personal fears and insecurities and systematically violating and encouraging our resentment for one another. He did this in such a way that neither of us doubted his sincerity for a moment, until I finally got a weird feeling and decided to ask that night. And even more then, I didn't really anticipate finding out that he had been two-faced and manipulative to that extreme. James kicked him out that night, and neither of us had talked to him again, as far as I know. I haven't spoken to James in a year and a half. I proceeded with the divorce because even though Mike was an insincere piece of shit, he caused me to get enough distance from James that I was able to see that I deserved much better. Last I heard about Mike was from his mom, who called to see why he had been asked abruptly to leave James' house. I told her what he had done, and she didn't seem surprised. I asked if she was aware of any mental problems he might have, and she said she didn't want to betray her son by giving details, but that he isn't right in the head. I asked about several of the traumatic events that Mike claimed to be a victim of, and she said there has never been any evidence that any of that really happened. I don't know why he actively initiated the final downfall of my marriage, because I never felt it was an attempt to be with me. I don't get what his motivations or gain would have been. Mike's mom texted me a few days after he left James' house to tell me that he had been admitted to a psychiatric facility. It wouldn't be out for a long time, but she wouldn't elaborate. So former boss turned friend turned delusional sociopath. Let's not meet again.